Chapter 2859. For conditions, Nie Tian fell silent after hearing Nie Dao's words. He wanted to enter the ancestral grounds and see how Mo Rushi was doing. But there was no way to open the ancestral grounds now. He could not forcefully open the ancestral grounds with his strength, and even if he had the strength, he would not dare to do so. If he forcefully broke the bloodline seal, he might destroy the entire ancestral grounds. The only way right now was to let Nie Tian's uncles, Nie Filiu and Nie Fiyu, recover their strength before opening the ancestral grounds. However, Nie Filiu, and the others' Yuan meridians were completely destroyed. It would be extremely difficult to even restore their Yuan meridians, let alone recover their strength. Nie Tian would naturally think of a way to help Nie Filiu and the others recover, but he was worried that their bodies were too weak and would not be able to wait until that day. After a cultivator's Yuan meridians were destroyed, they were equivalent to an ordinary person with a lifespan of 100 years at most. Even if Nie Filiu and the others were only youths, they would only have a few decades of lifespan under the most ideal circumstances. Nie Tian was most worried about Nie Dao. The latter was already old and could die at any time with his Yuan meridians destroyed. Nie Tian, everyone has their own fate. Life and death are in the hands of the heavens. You do not need to worry about us. Nie Dao knew what Nie Tian was thinking. He laughed brightly and said, although the people in the ancestral grounds are sealed, they are very safe. When your strength increases in the future, you will naturally find a way to open the ancestral grounds. Nie Tian frowned slightly when he heard Nie Dao's words and said heavily, Grandfather, don't worry, I will definitely help you recover. Nie Tian, I am very happy that you have such intentions. Nie Dao smiled slightly, but it was a little bitter. Nie Tian's gaze focused slightly and did not say anything else. Next, he had everyone temporarily settle down in the Wind and Cloud Alliance. He would personally guard this place. Nie Tian. At this moment, a voice rang out from outside the main hall. A figure then appeared at the entrance of the main hall. Lian Jiufeng. Nie Tian frowned when he saw the figure, and his expression darkened slightly. He hadn't thought that Lian Jiufeng and the others would still be here. What do you want? Lian Jiufeng's figure landed outside the hall and looked Lian Jiufeng with a cold gaze. You must be present for the Nether Emperor's revival, Lian Jiufeng said gravely. Face cold, Nie Tian said with a plain tone, I've fulfilled all of your demands. If the Netherworld Emperor still can't be resurrected, it's none of my business. He had already made a deal with the ancient underworld. But now Lian Jiufeng and the others had brought up another condition, and at a time like this no less. How could he not be angry? Nie Tian, what if we can help your family and friends recover their Yuan veins? Lian Jiufeng frowned and looked at Nie Tian with burning eyes. Nie Tian's expression changed. His eyes trembled as he asked, Are you serious? Of course. Lian Jiufeng nodded. As long as you help us revive the Nether Emperor, it won't be difficult for the Nether Emperor to heal their Yuan veins. Nie Tian's gaze darkened when he heard Lian Jiufeng's words. So Lian Jiufeng wanted him to help the ancient Ming revive the Nether Emperor first, and then the Nether Emperor would heal Nie Dao and the others' Yuan veins. Originally, Nie Tian could accept such a condition, but he had a guarantee that the Nether Emperor would heal Nie Dao and the others' Yuan veins after he was revived. Lian Jiufeng and the others were the Nether Emperor's subordinates. Even if they made a promise, it didn't represent the Nether Emperor's will. If the Nether Emperor was unwilling to save them after he was revived, wouldn't all this be for nothing? More importantly, the Nether Emperor had once wanted to devour the 9 regions. If he still desired the 9 regions after he was revived, then wouldn't Nie Tian's actions put the 9 regions in danger? Nie Tian frowned slightly when he thought of this. He asked, Lian Jiufeng, if I help you revive the Nether Emperor, what guarantee do you have that the Nether Emperor will fulfill my conditions? My life. Lian Jiufeng frowned and took a step forward. He said heavily. Nie Tian's eyes trembled. He stared at Lian Jiufeng for a long time before he said, I can revive the Nether Emperor, but my conditions are not so simple. What conditions do you have? Tell me. Lion Jiufeng's eyes were dark as he said loudly. The ancient Ming had planned for hundreds of thousands of years to revive the Nether Emperor. He would agree to any conditions Nie Tian made, no matter how harsh they were. Nie Tian nodded and said, "First, after the Nether Emperor is revived, he must help my family and friends recover their yuan veins. Second, after the Nether Emperor is revived, he must not covet the 9 regions. Third, the Nether Emperor must help Cher recover her memories. Fourth, after Cher recovers her memories, she can decide where she wants to go and who she wants to follow. The Nether Emperor is not to interfere." Nie Tian's eyes flashed when he was finished. He said, "Not a single one of these conditions can be omitted." Lion Jiufeng frowned. He looked terrible. He hadn't thought that Nie Tian's conditions would be so harsh. The first and second conditions were acceptable, but the third and fourth conditions were very troublesome. As one of the 3 bodies of the heaven-punishing devil heart, Lion Jiufeng naturally knew how important the kindness body of Cher was to the heaven-punishing devil heart. Without the kindness body, the heaven-punishing devil heart of the Nether Emperor would be incomplete. An incomplete heaven-punishing devil heart would greatly weaken the Nether Emperor's power. "It looks like my conditions have made you hesitate. Forget it." Nie Tian looked at Lion Jiufeng and smiled faintly. He said, "I have a way to recover their yuan veins, and even if the Nether Emperor does not revive, I have a way to protect Cher's life." Lion Jiufeng frowned, and his expression became even uglier. He believed Nie Tian's words. After all, the latter had been to the Sacred Soul region before. Moreover, when Nie Tian took out the Heavenly Law Sacred Heart, he saw with his own eyes that the Heavenly Law Sacred Heart's aura was somewhat similar to the tear of the princess. The two seemed to resonate in some way. If the Nether Emperor does not revive, the Heavenly Law Sacred Heart's power is enough to protect Cher's life. Are you still hesitating? Nie Tian looked at Lion Jiufeng and smiled. Then, he moved and prepared to leave. Nie Tian, I agree to your 4 conditions on behalf of the Nether Emperor. It was at this moment another voice sounded, and a figure appeared. It was the killing body, 7 kills. 7 kills, you... Lion Jiufeng abruptly turned around. His fiery red face froze when he saw 7 kills appear out of nowhere. Lion, we have no other choice. 7 kills' eyes flashed. He said solemnly, I believe that if the Nether Emperor were here, he would make the same choice. All right, let's do it. Lion Jiufeng's eyes flashed, but he still nodded in the end. Very good. Seeing that the two had agreed, Nie Tian's lips curled into a strange smile. Then, he flipped his hand, and a white ball of light appeared in his palm. It was the heart of the Heavenly Law. Lion Jiufeng and 7 kills were stunned at the same time. They asked, what are you planning to do? Chapter 2860. The Eye of the Underworld Emperor, what do you mean? Outside the hall, Lion Jiufeng and 7 kills sensed the change in Nie Tian's gaze. Their expressions turned ugly. They had personally witnessed the power of the Heavenly Law Sacred Heart. They could feel that the power contained within the Heavenly Law Sacred Heart greatly suppressed their ancient demonic energy. Nie Tian clearly did not take out the Heavenly Law Sacred Heart for them to see. It's very simple. I'll let you absorb some of the power of the Heavenly Way, lest your Lord Emperor of the Underworld goes back on his word. Nie Tian smiled and said playfully, Nie Tian, you... Lion Jiufeng's eyes trembled. He was momentarily speechless. He had not thought that Nie Tian would be so devious as to use the power of the Heavenly Law Sacred Heart to suppress them. What? Don't you want to? Nie Tian smiled faintly, his face expressionless. He could already feel that the power of the Heavenly Way could suppress the ancient demonic energy. That was why he had Lulu activate some of the power of the Heavenly Way, and then had Fat Cat use it to create the Heavenly Dao seal and pour it into Lion Jiufeng and 7 kills. Once the Underworld Emperor was revived, he could use Lion Jiufeng and 7 kills' lives to threaten the Underworld Emperor if he went back on his word. He was not doing this immorally. He was just adding a bargaining chip. I am willing. 7 kills stared at Nie Tian with his eyes of extreme kill. A long time later, he finally made up his mind and growled. Lion Jiufeng looked helplessly at 7 kills and nodded in the end. At this moment, they had no other choice to revive the Underworld Emperor. Very good. Nie Tian smiled, and then had Lulu and Fat Cat begin. A moment later, several heavenly Dao seals formed and entered Lian Jiufeng and 7 kills' bodies. The two had ugly expressions. They were clearly in great pain. The power of the heavenly way suppressed the ancient demonic energy perfectly. The existence of the heavenly Dao seals prevented Lian Jiufeng and 7 kills from using their strength. Most importantly, they could feel the immense pressure of the heavenly energy, almost suffocating them. Blazing Jiufeng, 7 kills. I'm sure you know better than me how powerful the heavenly Dao seal is. Nie Tian's gaze swept over Raging Flame and Qi Sha. He smiled sinisterly and said, "If the Emperor of the Underworld dares to play any tricks after he revives, then don't blame me for being impolite. Don't worry. The Emperor of the Underworld will agree to your terms," 7 kills said with a cold face. To the heaven-punishing demon heart, the slaughter physique and the evil physique were even more important. Nie Tian had threatened the Underworld Emperor with the blazing 9 blades and the 7 kills physique. "Nie Tian, can we leave now?" Lian Jiufeng asked in a cold voice with an ugly expression on his face. He was clearly growing impatient. "Don't worry." Nie Tian, however, smiled faintly and said in a loud voice, "Lord Sky Chieftain, Lord Earth Chieftain, come out." As soon as he finished speaking, the figures of the Heaven and Earth Chiefs appeared. I may have killed Nangong Jiueming, but the remnants of the Nangong family and the Sacred Parliament are still here. I do not wish for anyone to harm my friends, so please stay in the Wind and Cloud Alliance and protect them. Nie Tian looked at the Heaven and Earth Chiefs and said with a smile. The Heaven and Earth Chief's eyes focused slightly and then looked at 7 kills and Lian Jiufeng. "You two stay." 7 kills frowned and said heavily, "Yes." The Heaven and Earth Chiefs nodded and said loudly. Nie Tian nodded slightly and returned to the hall. He bid farewell to Nie Dao before leaving with 7 kills and Lian Jiufeng. The Heaven and Earth Chiefs looked in the direction Nie Tian and the others had left in with gloomy eyes. They sighed and said, "I hope that Lord 7 kills and the prince can successfully revive the Emperor of the Underworld." High up in the sky, Nie Tian followed behind 7 kills and Lian Jiufeng and flew through the sky. About half an hour later, the 3 arrived in the sky above a dark mountain range. "Let's go down." 7 kills nodded slightly. He seemed a little impatient. Nie Tian looked at the dark mountain range below and frowned slightly. He saw that the entire mountain range was enveloped by a powerful demonic aura. It was dark and eerie, like a giant beast crouching on the ground, ready to leap up and devour everything. Nie Tian, be careful. The demonic aura here is very heavy. It will greatly suppress your strength. Fat Cat's voice reminded Nie Tian at this moment. Amen. Nie Tian nodded and became much more cautious. Then, the 3 landed outside a dark mountain range. 7 kills and Lian Jiufeng did not say anything and walked straight into the dark mountain range. Nie Tian followed the 2 closely. The closer he went to the mountain range, the denser the demonic aura became. It was as if there was an abyss of demonic aura hidden in the mountain range. A while later, Nie Tian finally entered the mountain range. The moment he entered, he was stunned by what he saw. His entire body stiffened. In front of him was not a mountain range, but a bottomless abyss. The abyss was tens of thousands of meters wide and bottomless. The demonic aura was so thick that it seemed like it could instantly devour a person. A huge formation floated above the abyss. It looked like a giant that stood between the heavens and the earth, overlooking the world. The strangest thing was that a terrifying power of darkness surged at the center of the formation. Nie Tian abruptly raised his head and saw an evil eye at the center of the power of darkness. It looked down at the world with a sharp and domineering evil aura. It was as if the owner of the evil eye was the ruler of the world. Nie Tian shuddered the moment he saw the evil eye. It was as if he had fallen into a bottomless abyss. He abruptly woke up in the next moment. His body was drenched in cold sweat, and his face was deathly pale. Nietan, you're the first person in the 9 regions to dare look directly at the eye of the Underworld Emperor. Lien Jiufeng turned to look at Nietan and said cold. Nietan frowned, his expression extremely dark. The evil eye in the formation was the eye of the Underworld Emperor. What he didn't know was that the eye of the Underworld Emperor had opened with his help. Back when Earth Chief had brought the 3 lives Samsura disc to Nietan, he had wanted Cher to open it. However, due to a strange combination of factors, the person who had opened it in the end had been Nietan. The eye of the Underworld Emperor had only truly opened when the 3 lives Samsara formation had been opened. The eye of the Underworld Emperor. Nietan's expression darkened when he heard the name, and his gaze trembled. He hadn't expected the eye of the Underworld Emperor to be so terrifying. He could sense that the power contained within the eye of the Underworld Emperor was even more terrifying than Empress Xuantian's illusory blood eyes of the night. If a single eye of the Underworld Emperor was already this terrifying, then the Underworld Emperor himself was unimaginably powerful. Let's go, Nietan. Lien Jiufeng glanced at Nietan before walking down the abyss of demonic energy. Nietan's eyebrows furrowed slightly as he followed after them. The closer they got to the bottom of the abyss, the denser the demonic energy in the air became, and Nietan could feel it. A moment later, he even felt like it was difficult to breathe. However, right at this moment, Nietan's eyes suddenly narrowed, and his expression changed. Chapter 2861. Cher, are you all right? It's Cher's aura. Nietan's expression abruptly changed when he sensed Cher's aura. Undisguisable joy appeared in his eyes. Although the aura he sensed was very weak, he was absolutely certain that it was Cher's aura. The person you're thinking of is at the bottom of the devil-forbidden abyss. You'll be able to see her very soon. Lien Jiufeng raised his eyebrows slightly when he saw Nietan's reaction. Nietan frowned and glanced at Lien Jiufeng. He didn't say anything. Then they walked towards the bottom of the devil-forbidden abyss. Although Nietan could sense that the pressure of the demonic energy was growing stronger and stronger, he grew more and more excited because he was thinking about Cher. A long time later, Nietan sensed that Cher's aura was growing stronger and stronger. He couldn't help but look around. However, not only was his strength suppressed at the bottom of the devil-forbidden abyss, even his senses were suppressed. He could barely see within 5 meters of himself. You've returned. It was at this moment a familiar voice rang out. It caused Nietan's pupils to shrink abruptly. His eyes were filled with excitement. This familiar voice belonged to none other than Cher. Following that, a white-robed figure appeared, walking over step by step. Her looks could topple nations. Her figure could topple cities. Who else could it be other than Cher? Cher. Nietan's eyes were shaking. Even his lips were trembling. However, Cher walked right past him and arrived next to Lien Jiufeng and 7 kills. She didn't even spare him a glance. Princess. 7 kills, and Lien Jiufeng nodded and greeted Cher at the same time when they saw her walking over. Shue nodded slightly, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Only now did Cher look at Nietan. She seemed to have just noticed him. She hurriedly glanced at him before looking back at Lien Jiufeng. She asked, Lien, who is he? Cher had completely forgotten who Nietan was. Facing Nietan, she felt as if she were looking at a complete stranger. An old friend of yours. You once left something on him, and now he's here to return it to you. Lien Jiufeng smiled faintly and stared straight at Nietan. His expression was clearly provocative. Nietan's expression darkened. Of course, he knew that Lien Jiufeng was talking about the tear of the princess. You're my friend? Cher was taken aback for a moment. Then, she took a step forward and stared at Nietan with a pair of bright and clear eyes. She asked with a puzzled expression, Why don't I remember you? Nietan frowned as he felt a tearing pain in his heart. She had completely forgotten everything that had happened between him and Cher. However, she couldn't be blamed for this. She could only blame the 2 people next to her. In order to revive the Emperor of the Netherworld, Nietan didn't know what 7 kills and Lion Jiufeng had done to Cher. To think that Cher would forget everything. Hello, Cher. Nie Tian's eyes focused slightly, and his mood finally eased a lot. He smiled faintly and greeted her. Since Cher didn't recognize him, he would start getting to know Cher again. But right now, what Nie Tian really wanted to say was, Cher, are you well? Hello. Cher looked at Nie Tian and smiled. Her face was as beautiful as jade, and her eyes were as pure as a newborn baby's. It was just like when she first met Nie Tian in the forest. Nie Tian nodded slightly and smiled. He thought to himself, don't worry, Cher. I will definitely help you recover your memories. I will make you whole. I will let you make your own choice. You will choose a path that belongs to you. At this moment, Qi Sha had already lost his patience. He looked at Nie Tian and said coldly, Nie Tian, return the crown princess's things to her now. Nie Tian glanced at 7 kills, took a deep breath, and nodded. Lady, do it, 7 kills said cold as he looked at Cher. Cher nodded slightly. Her clear eyes looked at Nie Tian, but she didn't attack immediately. Instead, she asked in confusion, how did we meet? Nie Tian smiled. Many things flashed through his mind. A long time later, he withdrew his memories and smiled faintly. He said, you saved me when we first met. Really? Cher's eyes lit up. She was pleasantly surprised. She said seriously, so, I'm your savior? Nie Tian nodded and said, you're my savior. Then, can I ask you for one thing? Cher's eyes lit up again. There was a shy smile on her face, as if she was afraid that Nie Tian would refuse her. Sure. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, I'm willing to do anything for you. Cher looked at Nie Tian. Her bright eyes froze for a moment, as if it was a little strange. But the next moment, she smiled. It was not an innocent smile. She took a step forward and whispered in Nie Tian's ear, I don't want to stay here. Can you take me away? Nie Tian went blank for a moment. Then his eyes trembled, and tears welled up in his eyes. He felt an incomparable pain in his heart, as if someone was tearing it apart. It turned out that Cher wanted to leave, but couldn't. Cher, I'm sorry. Nie Tian's heart trembled. He looked at Cher with moist eyes and said in his heart, after today, I won't let you suffer anymore. Enough. The time for flirting is over. Let's get to work. At that moment, 7 kills spoke coldly. He was obviously very impatient. Nie Tian frowned. His eyes suddenly became cold and locked onto 7 kills. In an instant, 7 kills felt he was shrouded by a terrifying murderous intent. It was even scarier than his extreme killer chi. 7 kills, don't be angry. I'll ask him another question. Cher looked back at 7 kills. She seemed to be a little scared and said timidly, Go ahead. 7 kills looked at Nie Tian and nodded. What's your name? Cher's eyes twinkled and her voice trembled as she asked. Nie Tian. Nie Tian smiled faintly and nodded. Nie Tian. Cher nodded and murmured word by word. She then said happily, I only have one day's memory, but I want to remember your name. I want to remember it forever and never forget it. Can I do that? After saying that, sparkling and translucent tears gushed out from her eyes. Her eyes trembled and she suddenly laughed. She wiped the tears off her face and seemed a little embarrassed. She smiled and said, Why am I crying? Cher. Seeing this, Nie Tian's heart trembled. He felt like a knife was twisting in his heart. Nie Tian, one last question. Are we just friends? Cher looked at Nie Tian and suddenly asked with a smile. Cher, you are my woman. Nie Tian took a step forward. The tears in his eyes flowed down silently. Cher looked at Nie Tian. Her clear eyes twinkled. She gently bit her lips and didn't even notice that there was blood at the corner of her mouth. At that moment, both of them felt their souls tremble at the same time. But just then, the exorcism abyss suddenly shook strangely. Instantly, a terrifying demonic energy appeared and shot up to the sky. The enormous demonic energy spread out in all directions. Chapter 2862. Heaven-punishing underworld, Monarch and Jiufeng and Qi Sha cried out at the same time when the devil-sealing abyss suddenly shook violently. They seemed to have realized something, and their faces were filled with panic as they looked towards the center of the abyss. Hmm. Nietion's eyes suddenly focused. He didn't know what was going on. Ah! At this time, Cher's smile suddenly changed. She seemed to be in great pain, and then she let out a heart-wrenching scream. Nietion's expression flickered as he stepped forward and held Shui in his arms. What's wrong, Shui? Something seemed to be happening at the center of the abyss, and Cher's body was resonating with it. She was in great pain. Cher was in great pain. She hugged her head as if she couldn't control herself. Lion Jiufeng, what's going on? Nietion's expression darkened. He looked cold at Lion Jiufeng and growled. The Nether Monarch is about to break the seal. Lion Jiufeng's eyes trembled. There was panic, fear, but most of it was excitement. Nietion's expression was extremely dark. He growled, the Nether Monarch is reviving. Why is Cher in so much pain? It's because the heaven-punishing demonic energy inside her has gone berserk. Lian Jiufeng looked at Cher and said with trembling eyes, heaven-punishing demonic energy. Eyebrows furrowed. Nietion fixed Shui with a nervous look on his face. Sure enough, he sensed that a very violent power was growing active inside of her. The power's aura was extremely evil and evil. It was suffocating. Boom! At this time, the center of the abyss suddenly shook. Then, waves of power surged out, and the surrounding demonic energy started to disperse bit by bit. Then, a black figure appeared and shot into the sky. Its aura was extremely powerful. Nietion's eyes darkened. He looked at the black figure and finally saw its true appearance. The black shadow was in the shape of a human, but its body was wrapped in an extremely thick demonic aura, making it impossible to see its true appearance. It was like a corpse lying horizontally in the air. On that black shadow, Nietion felt a very strong demonic aura. That kind of aura was too strong. When he perceived the past, he actually had a feeling of suffocation. It was as if the entire devil-sealing abyss's fiendish chi was gathered on that figure. The devil aura that was condensed on the black shadow was extremely dense and terrifying. It was as though he could destroy the entire forbidden devil abyss with just a slight movement. The demonic aura on the black shadow was too terrifying. Just a glance at it was enough to make one's soul tremble. Lord Emperor of the Underworld, Lian Jiufeng and Seven Kills cried out in joy when they saw the black figure. Nietion's expression changed and his face darkened. This silhouette was the most powerful emperor of the heaven-punishing clan, the Emperor of the Underworld. Boom! 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 At this moment, the black shadow began to tremble. Then, the demonic aura in the forbidden devil abyss began to surge wildly like a roaring sea. Nietion was shocked. He felt that the demonic aura around him was too terrifying. It was as if every wisp of demonic aura had the power to tear the world apart. Not good. Lord Emperor of the Underworld is about to wake up. At this time, Lian Jiufeng and Seven Kills growled at the same time. They were actually very panicked. Then, the two turned to look at Cher at the same time and shouted, Cher, hurry up and take out the tear of the princess. Cher was stunned at first. Then, she looked at Nietion. Amen. Nietion looked at Cher and nodded heavily. He said, do it. Cher's clear eyes trembled. She seemed to be very conflicted, but she nodded in the end. She took a step forward and placed a hand on Nietion's chest. In an instant, Nietion felt a violent power surge into his body and rush through his veins. Then, the power circulated through his body and began to absorb the tear of the princess bit by bit. At the same time, the demonic aura in the forbidden devil abyss grew even more violent. Then, endless demonic aura began to slowly condense into demonic runes in the air. They revolved around the Emperor of the Underworld like a hurricane. A moment later, the demonic aura around the Emperor of the Underworld grew thicker and thicker. It was like a giant beast of darkness that wanted to devour everything. The violent, murderous heaven-punishing devil chi wrapped around the Emperor of the Underworld's body, wrapping him up like a cocoon. The heaven-punishing demon cocoon. Lian Jiufeng and Seven Kills exclaimed at the same time. They shouted, Lord Emperor of the Underworld is about to wake up. In the next moment, they looked at Tian and Cher. They were extremely nervous. They were clearly worried about something. The heaven-punishing demon cocoon had formed. The Emperor of the Underworld would awaken once the cocoon broke. The moment the Emperor of the Underworld awakened, he would be extremely weak. He would need the tear of the princess to recover his strength. If Cher hadn't extracted the tear of the princess from Tian by then, the Emperor of the Underworld would be in danger. But there was nothing Lian Jiufeng and 7 Kills could do. They could only watch from the side. They couldn't help at all. Cher continued to absorb the power of the tear of the princess from Tian. Even though she was doing her best, it would take some time for her to extract the complete tear of the princess. Bang! It was at this moment that the first crack appeared on the heaven-punishing demon cocoon. Lian Jiufeng and 7 Kills' eyes trembled. They were extremely nervous. The heaven-punishing demon cocoon had 9 cracks. If 9 cracks appeared on the heaven-punishing demon cocoon, it would shatter. But now, the first crack had appeared on the heaven-punishing demon cocoon. Bang! 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 Then, several more cracks appeared on the heaven-punishing demon cocoon. The 8th crack, Lian Jiufeng and 7 Kills were extremely nervous. They counted the cracks one by one and stared unblinkingly at the heaven-punishing demon cocoon. If the 9th crack appeared on the heaven-punishing demon cocoon, the Emperor of the Underworld would awaken. Bang! Lian Jiufeng and Qi Sha watched as the 9th crack appeared on the demonic cocoon. Their expressions froze for an instant. Boom! In the next moment, the heaven-punishing devil cocoon suddenly trembled, and then the entire cocoon directly exploded. It was at this moment a voice rang out. It was very soft, but it was very clear. Boom, boom, boom. The demonic energy in the surroundings began to ripple like a giant wave. It seemed to be instinctively avoiding something. It was at this moment a figure stood up from the shattered demon cocoon. It was an extremely young man. His face was as pale as paper, but his facial features were extremely exquisite. In fact, he was even more handsome than most women. Perhaps it was because he was too handsome, but his face gave off a very uncomfortable feeling. He stood there quietly as a faint aura surged around him. It was very restrained and not ostentatious in the slightest, but it gave off a very strange feeling. It was as if he was the master of this space. Lord Emperor of the Underworld. Lian Jiufeng and 7 Kills exclaimed at the same time when they saw the figure. The trembling in their eyes had reached its limit. Chapter 2863. The Resurrection of the Netherworld Emperor. The heaven-punishing demon cocoon awakened in the magic ceiling abyss. Lord Emperor of the Netherworld. Lian Jiufeng and 7 Kills exclaimed in unison. The ancient Ming had planned for hundreds of thousands of years, and the moment the Emperor of the Netherworld was resurrected had finally arrived. But at this time, the Emperor of the Netherworld's body suddenly shook, and then his body actually began to split open. Bloody gashes appeared, and the Emperor of the Netherworld's body was instantly drenched in blood. The heaven-punishing demon seal. Lian Jiufeng and 7 Kills exclaimed in shock. In the next moment, they looked at Tian and Cher anxiously. If Cher couldn't extract the tear of the princess from Tian, then the heaven-punishing demon seal would tear the Emperor of the Netherworld apart. The Emperor of the Netherworld had been sealed for hundreds of thousands of years. If he was killed by the heaven-punishing demon seal the moment he awakened, it would be far too tragic. It's done. At this time, Cher finally extracted the complete tear of the princess and shouted in joy. Cher! Lian Jiufeng and 7 Kills' eyes trembled as they shouted in unison. They wanted nothing more than for Cher to immediately use the tear of the princess on the Emperor of the Netherworld. Cher held the tear of the princess in her palm and frowned slightly. She looked at Tian with a slightly strange gaze. Just a moment ago, a few incomplete images had appeared in her mind, and they all contained Tian's figure. Cher, are you all right? Tian looked at Cher and asked with a frown when he noticed that the latter's gaze was a little strange. Cher, hurry up and give me the tear of the princess. On the other side, Lian Jiufeng and 7 Kills' voices rang out urgently. Cher's eyes flashed. She looked at Nie Tian with a faint smile and said nothing. Instead, she moved toward the Emperor of the Netherworld. Quick! Lian Jiofeng and 7 kills were stunned when they saw that Cher had reached the Underworld Emperor's side. They growled almost instinctively. They knew that as long as Cher dripped the tear of the lady onto the Emperor of the Netherworld, the Emperor of the Netherworld would be revived. Cher was stunned for a moment. She turned around and glanced at Nie Tian. Her clear eyes flickered and tears rolled down her cheeks again. She didn't know why, but at this moment, her heart ached so much that it almost suffocated her. She didn't know why she was doing what she was doing. She didn't even know who she was. However, she knew that this silver-haired man was very important to her, even more important than her own life. Cher, stop daydreaming. The Emperor of the Underworld can't hold on much longer. Lian Jiofeng and Qi Sha shouted again when they saw Cher suddenly stop moving. Cher was taken aback for a moment, hesitating for a moment in her eyes. Then, she turned over her palm, and the princess tear fell down soundlessly, slowly dripping on the body of the Underworld Emperor. The moment the tear of the lady fell, it entered the Emperor of the Netherworld's body. A moment later, the Emperor of the Netherworld's torn body began to heal rapidly. In the blink of an eye, the wounds on the Emperor of the Netherworld's body had completely healed. Nie Tian looked at the Emperor of the Netherworld, his eyes trembling slightly. His expression was extremely ugly. Vaguely, he had a very bad premonition, as if something terrible was about to happen. At this moment, the Emperor of the Netherworld's tightly shut eyes suddenly opened. Boom! Boom, boom, boom. Just at this moment, the demonic energy in the entire devil abyss rumbled and became completely berserk. Waves of demonic energy were like roiling and roaring enormous beasts as they madly attacked the space. Nie Tian looked at the Emperor of the Netherworld and could not help but tremble. He actually sensed a suffocating malevolence. This malevolence was extremely similar to the aura he had sensed from the Emperor of the Netherworld's eyes. I have returned. The Emperor of the Netherworld suddenly opened his eyes and said solemnly. The Emperor of the Netherworld opened his eyes and spoke in a deep voice. His eyes were like a ferocious beast that had been in slumber for countless years and were filled with malevolence. Boom, boom, boom. In the next moment, the demonic energy in the devil abyss started to move and actually gathered towards the Emperor of the Netherworld. It turned into streaks of demonic energy runes and surged into his eyes. In the blink of an eye, all the demonic energy in the abyss was absorbed by the Emperor of the Netherworld's eyes. At this moment, the demonic aura on the Emperor of the Netherworld's body had reached its peak. His figure stood there like a vortex of demonic energy, emitting an extremely violent demonic aura. It was extremely terrifying. Beside the Emperor of the Netherworld, Cher opened her mouth slightly, as if she wanted to say something. But before she could say anything, a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of her mouth. Xueling, you've done well. The Emperor of the Netherworld suddenly raised his head and stared at Cher with a pair of terrifying eyes. The corners of his mouth curled up into a sinister arc. He stretched out his palm, and on his palm floated a pitch-black teardrop. The tear of a princess. Nie Tian's eyes shook when he saw the black teardrop, and he cried out in his heart. The teardrop on the Emperor of the Netherworld's palm had an extremely familiar aura. It was the tear of a princess. However, the tear of a princess was no longer as pure and crystalline as before. Instead, it was pitch black like the night sky and filled with malice. Moreover, it contained an extremely terrifying, violent power. The tear of a princess had entered the Emperor of the Netherworld's body. When the Emperor of the Netherworld took out the tear of a princess again, it had completely changed. It was obvious that the tear of a princess had caused a terrifying change in the Emperor of the Netherworld's body. This, Lian Jiofeng and Qi Sha's expressions changed at the same time. They gasped in shock. Xueling, I'll return your tear of a princess to you. At this moment, the Emperor of the Netherworld suddenly took a step forward. The tear of a princess slowly floated over and actually returned to Cher's body once more. The moment the tear of a princess returned, Cher's body shuddered. Her pretty face suddenly twisted as if she was enduring great pain. Cher! Tian's eyes trembled when he saw this. Then, he moved to Cher's side. "Nya, Tian." Cher turned around to look at Tian. She seemed to have used up all of her strength to finally call out Tian's name. However, her eyes instantly lost their luster at this moment. Her body shuddered violently and swayed on the verge of collapse. Cher! Tian's expression changed abruptly as he rushed forward and held Cher in his arms. Cher raised her head with difficulty. The corner of her lips twitched as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. She slowly closed her eyes, but a faint smile still hung at the corner of her lips. "Cher!" Tian growled, but Cher in his arms seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep. She did not respond at all. "Stop shouting. Ling will never wake up again." At this moment, the Emperor of the Netherworld spoke. He stared at Tian with a strange light in his eyes. He seemed to be very surprised. "Impossible." Tian's pupils abruptly contracted as he roared madly. "Just what did you do to her?" He stared at the Emperor of the Netherworld and said icily, "What did you do to her?" Cher had been fine at first, but something had happened to her after the Emperor of the Netherworld had returned the tear of a princess to Cher. Chapter 2864. Heavenly punishing, Tian's eyes were filled with murderous intent as he stared coldly at the Emperor of the Netherworld. The Emperor of the Netherworld looked at Tian with a strange and surprised look in Tian's eyes. "Speak. What did you do to Cher?" Tian let out another bellow as his aura surged violently like raging thunder, ready to explode at any moment. "You have the bloodline of both the Nye and Wu families. Your bloodline should be called the Fiend God Yuan Meridian, right?" The Emperor of the Netherworld looked at Tian and finally spoke. However, he ignored Tian's words and said, "Your talent is indeed very strong. You are worthy of the name Taboo. In the 9 regions, no one can break through to the half-saint realm except for the most talented cultivators. You are a first-level half-saint at such a young age. How rare. Why don't you join the ancient Ming race and become our high priest?" The Emperor of the Netherworld didn't care about Cher at all. He was trying to rope in Tian and make him the high priest to the ancient Ming race. "Let me ask you, what did you do to Cher?" Tian's eyes trembled as he took a step forward like a ferocious beast. A violent aura erupted from his body and pressed down on the Emperor of the Netherworld. He was already a first-level half-saint. Under normal circumstances, his battle prowess was comparable to a 9th-level half-saint. His aura was enough to suppress a peak divine state cultivator. However, something strange happened when his aura enveloped the Emperor of the Netherworld. The Emperor of the Netherworld stood there motionlessly, but his aura disappeared as if it was swallowed by space. "Lad, since you want to know what happened to Ling, I will tell you." The Emperor of the Netherworld ignored Tian's shock and smiled. "Ling's tear of the princess absorbed the heavenly punishing demon seal in my body. I returned the tear of the princess to her so that she could help me withstand the backlash of the heavenly punishing demon seal. However, her strength was too weak, and she was unable to withstand the heaven-punishing devil imprint, so she fell unconscious." The voice of the Underworld Emperor was very calm, without any fluctuation, as if he were talking about something trivial. It was as if in his eyes, Cher was just a chess piece that could be casually discarded. "Bastard!" Tian's eyes trembled violently after hearing the Emperor of the Underworld's words, and he roared like thunder. He finally understood why the resurrection of the Emperor of the Netherworld required the tear of the princess. The moment the Emperor of the Netherworld had awakened, the heaven-punishing demon seal within his body had started to backfire, causing countless bloody wounds to appear on his body. His entire body was about to be completely torn apart. The function of the princess's tear was to help the Netherworld Emperor absorb the heaven-punishing devil seal and help him endure the backlash of the devil seal. After the Emperor of the Underworld was resurrected, he actually returned the tear of the princess, which had absorbed the heaven-punishing devil seal, to Cher. causing Cher to fall into a coma. Nietian didn't expect the Emperor of the Netherworld to be so vicious that he would sacrifice Cher for him. You like Schweling very much. Facing the enraged Nietian, the Emperor of the Netherworld's expression was calm. He smiled faintly and said, "Then you better cherish what's next. With Schwelling's current strength, she has at most 3 days left to live. Within 3 days, she will definitely be swallowed by the heaven-punishing devil seal." "What did you say?" Nietian's gaze darkened, and he was extremely shocked. "You have already heard it. There is no need for me to repeat myself." The Emperor of the Netherworld raised his eyebrows, and there was actually a smile at the corner of his mouth. He had killed Cher with his own hands, and he actually didn't feel anything. Actually, when Ye Dongwang and Qi Wuxiong teamed up, they were able to defeat the Emperor of the Netherworld. On one hand, it was because the divine demon power restrained the heaven-punishing demon heart, and on the other hand, it was because the heaven-punishing demon seal within the Emperor of the Netherworld had activated. The Emperor of the Netherworld was so powerful precisely because he had merged with the heaven-punishing demon heart. However, merging with the heaven-punishing demon heart was not completely without a price. While the heaven-punishing demon heart gave the Emperor of the Netherworld great strength, it also formed the heaven-punishing demon seal in his body. Therefore, the Emperor of the Netherworld was constantly being tortured by the heaven-punishing demon seal. This prevented him from using his full strength. After that, in order to escape the torture of the heaven-punishing demon seal, he had been searching for something to restrain it. In the end, he discovered that the tear of the princess of the good body of the 3 transformations of the heaven-punishing demon heart could absorb the heaven-punishing demon seal. However, when he learned of this, the heaven-punishing demon seal in his body could no longer be suppressed. Later, before he died, he poured this information into the consciousness of the slaughter body and the evil body. In the end, in order to revive the Emperor of the Netherworld, Lian Jiufeng and 7 Kills decided to sacrifice Cher. After the tear of the princess absorbed the heaven-punishing demon seal, Cher had to be destroyed along with the heaven-punishing demon seal. Only then could the Emperor of the Netherworld not be suppressed by the heaven-punishing demon seal. Therefore, the Emperor of the Netherworld decided the moment he was revived that Cher must die. Lord Emperor of the Netherworld. At this time, Lian Jiufeng and 7 Kills arrived. They bowed deeply and called out respectfully, "7 Kills, Jiufeng, you have done well." The Emperor of the Netherworld smiled faintly and said casually, "Lord Emperor of the Netherworld, will Cher really die?" 7 Kills' eyes flashed. He suddenly looked at Cher and asked. The Emperor of the Netherworld laughed and said, "Even this Emperor cannot endure the heaven-punishing demon seal. Do you think Schweling can?" This. 7 Kills' eyes trembled. He was speechless. Lian Jiufeng frowned. His expression was a little ugly. The two of them still had feelings for Cher. After all, they and Cher were born from the heaven-punishing demon heart. They were like brother and sister of the same origin. If Cher really died, they would be sad. This Emperor is also very sad that Cher is dead, but this Emperor will not let Cher's death be in vain. This Emperor will definitely lead you to complete the great cause of the ancient Ming race. The Emperor of the Netherworld smiled faintly at Lian Jiufeng and 7 Kills. Although he said that he was sad, there was no sadness on his face. In fact, he looked happy. Lian Jiufeng and 7 Kills had ugly expressions. They didn't know what to say. They didn't think that the Emperor of the Netherworld would react like this to Cher's death. It was as if everyone else was dispensable in the Emperor of the Netherworld's eyes. Emperor of the Netherworld. At this moment, Nietian opened his mouth again. His eyes were filled with intense killing intent as he called out the Netherworld Emperor's name one word at a time. He couldn't sense the Emperor of the Netherworld's true strength, but he had to fight for Cher. Humph. The Emperor of the Netherworld smiled disdainfully when he felt Nietian's killing intent. "Brat, do you really think you can kill this Emperor with your current strength?" As a former Emperor, the Emperor of the Netherworld's strength was immeasurable. Although he had just been resurrected and his strength hadn't recovered to its peak, he He was confident that he could face a rank one-half saint without any pressure. "Do you think that I can't kill you?" The corner of Nietion's lips curled into a cold smile. His eyes shone with killing intent. His silhouette flickered slightly as he placed Shue into the 9 extremities. After that, he took a step forward as the sword intent around him gushed forth like a sharp sword, exuding an intense, killing intent as he stood tall in the air. He wouldn't allow the Emperor of the Netherworld to hurt Cher so easily. Chapter 2865. Utter Humiliation. Nietion's sword intent surged. He really was going to fight the Emperor of the Netherworld. "Nietion, don't be rash. You have the sacred heart of the heavenly law. Cher won't die," Fat Cat reminded Nietion. Nietion's expression changed slightly when he heard Fat Cat's words. He nodded, but his aura did not weaken at all. Instead, it grew even more violent. Even if he knew that Cher wouldn't die, he still wanted to fight the Emperor of the Netherworld. The Emperor of the Netherworld stared at Nietion and froze. He clearly didn't think that Nietion would be so bold as to really fight him. "Nietion, what are you doing?" Lion Jiufeng and Qi Sha exclaimed in shock when they saw this. Nietion wanted to fight the resurrected Emperor of the Netherworld. This was something they hadn't expected at all. "It's fine." The Emperor of the Netherworld chuckled and waved his hand. "I also want to see just how strong the legendary embryo of the demon and god is. Emperor of the Netherworld, this." Lion Jiufeng and Qi Sha were stunned. Their expressions were ugly, and they couldn't hide their worry. They naturally knew how terrifying the Emperor of the Netherworld was, but they were worried that the Emperor of the Netherworld had just been resurrected. Would something unexpected happen if he fought against Nietion? "Stand down." The Emperor of the Netherworld waved his hand again. He then stared coldly at Nietion and said disdainfully, "Make your move, embryo of the demon and god." "All right." Nietion's eyes trembled. He then unleashed his sword intent and the power of the demon and god in his body. The terrifying sword intent of the demon and god rippled through the air. It was so sharp that it seemed like it would tear the world apart. Not bad. The Emperor of the Netherworld's eyes didn't change at all when he felt Nietion's aura. Instead, he laughed. He clearly didn't think much of Nietion. "Kill." At this moment, Nietion roared in a low voice. His silhouette flickered as he unleashed the Starlight Heaven Slash. Sword images resembled mountains as they whistled through the air towards the Emperor of Hell. "Kill! Kill! Kill!" The violent sounds of killing were extremely terrifying. They resounded throughout the entire space, causing the entire world to tremble. At this moment, the Emperor of the Underworld felt a slight threat. His expression changed slightly as he exclaimed in surprise. In the next moment, he moved at an extremely fast speed, leaving behind several afterimages in the air. The figure of the Underworld Emperor halted, and he had moved a few thousand meters to the side, dodging Nietion's violent sword strike. "Damn it!" Nietion frowned his eyebrows and let out a low roar. He lashed out with his sword again. The sword intent spread out in the air, turning into a dozen sword shadows that attacked the Emperor of the Underworld from different directions. The sword wheels are scattered, and the power is not enough. "Do you think I need to dodge?" The Underworld Emperor smiled cold, his face full of disdain. Nietion scattered the sword wheels. Although he expanded the range of his attack, the power of each sword shadow was greatly reduced. This kind of attack posed no threat to the Emperor of the Underworld at all. The Emperor of the Underworld stood in his original position, not moving an inch. A layer of demonic chi appeared around his body, surging and forming a layer of demonic chi shield. Bang! In the next moment, the sword shadows landed on the demonic chi shield and exploded. The Emperor of the Underworld stood like a mountain, not moving an inch. "Young man, is this all you've got?" The Emperor of the Underworld suddenly raised his head and looked at Nietion. The corner of his mouth curled into a cold smile. Then, he moved, turning into a black ray of light, attacking Nietion. Puff! The Emperor of the Underworld's speed was too fast. Before Nietion could react, a wound appeared on his chest, and blood gushed out. Nietian frowned, his face incomparably gloomy. He could feel that the Emperor of the Underworld's strength was not strong, but his speed was so fast that he had no time to react. "Young man, today, I will make you remember me forever." At this moment, the Emperor of the Underworld's voice sounded again, fierce and sharp. In the next moment, Nietian saw a black shadow flying over from the void, extremely fast and incomparably cold. At this moment, there was no fear on his face. Instead, an eerie smile appeared on his face. Within Nietian's body, the divine and demonic energy surged and rushed towards the demonic eye. Boom! Then, an enormous eye power gushed out from the void and shrouded the area in front of him. Buzz! Then there was a low hum in the space. Time and space were actually imprisoned. The Emperor of the Underworld's figure in midair suddenly felt that the space around him had become incomparably thick, and he could not move his body. He could not help but let out a cry of surprise. At this moment, he was less than 10 meters away from Nietian. Nietian looked at the Emperor of the Underworld and could clearly see the latter's figure. The Emperor of the Underworld stretched out his hand, and a blade of demonic chi surged in his palm. At this moment, he actually wanted to leave a scar on Nietian's face. The scars left behind by the heaven-punishing demonic chi were not easily healed. Obviously, he wanted to use this method to humiliate Nietian and make Nietian remember him forever. Nietian's lips curled into a cold smile. He had already seen through the Emperor of the Underworld's intentions. "If that's the case, then I will first make you remember me forever." Nietianling smiled coldly. He raised the starry sky, slash in his hand, and the heavenly sacred heart appeared in his palm. In the next moment, a white light gushed out from his forehead and bombarded the heavenly sacred heart, activating a wave of heavenly Tao energy. Nietian raised his hand and merged the heavenly Tao energy into his sword intent. "Nietian, what are you doing?" Lian Jiofeng and 7 Kills cried out in shock when they saw this. They had the heavenly Tao seal in their bodies, so they naturally knew how terrifying the heavenly Tao energy was. Right now, Nietian's sword intent was merged with the heavenly Tao energy. Was he going to kill the Emperor of the Underworld? Whoosh! But Nietian ignored Lian Jiofeng and 7 Kills. His eyes were filled with murderous intent as he swung his sword. A sword shadow instantly appeared and enveloped the Emperor of the Underworld. In the next moment, the sword shadow fell, but it did not kill the Emperor of the Underworld. Instead, it left a glaring sword scar on his face. A sword scar. Nietian had left a sword scar on the Emperor of the Underworld's face. Moreover, he had deliberately merged the heavenly Tao energy into his sword intent to suppress the Emperor of the heaven-punishing demonic energy. This ensured that the sword scar would not disappear in a short time. Since the Emperor of the Underworld wanted to humiliate him, there was no need for him to be polite. A sword scar. Lian Jiofeng and 7 Kills' eyes trembled at the same time. They never thought that Nietian would humiliate the Emperor of the Underworld with a sword scar on his face instead of killing him. The Emperor of the Underworld was the strongest expert of the heaven-punishing clan and a former emperor of the martial way. Now that he had been resurrected, a junior had left a sword scar on his face. This kind of humiliation was far too obvious. "You're courting death, kid." The Emperor of the Underworld felt a burning pain on his face as he was trapped. He growled angrily and spread his demonic energy at the same time. It was obvious that he was trying to break out of the sealed space. It had never occurred to him that Nietian's eyes were actually the legendary 9 pupils. What was even stranger was that Nietian only had one eye. It was the 9 pupils. The 9 pupils. Yes, the power that Nietian had used to seal space was the 9 pupils. His demon, I actually possessed the power of the 9 pupils after devouring 9 god, was 9 pupils. Actually, Nietian had the chance to kill the Emperor of the Underworld at this time. Even if he couldn't kill him, he could still deal a heavy blow to him. However, he didn't do so because he still needed the Emperor of the Underworld to heal Nie Dao and the others. However, he knew that someone like the Emperor of the Underworld would never keep his word. That was why he had fought the Emperor of the Underworld not to kill him, but to intimidate him. Chapter 2866. I'll be waiting for you. The demonic energy around the Netherworld Emperor was thick and violent. He was about to break out of the sealed space. Nietian looked at the Netherworld Emperor indifferently. His eyes were filled with undisguised disdain. Lord Netherworld Emperor, Lian Jiofeng and 7 Kills looked at the Netherworld Emperor with trembling eyes. The Netherworld Emperor was completely enraged by Nietian. If he broke out of sealed space, he would fight Nietian to the death. The Netherworld Emperor had dominated the 9 regions for many years, but he had never been humiliated by a sword mark. Nietian's actions had exceeded the limits of his tolerance. However, Nietian did not panic in the slightest. Instead, he smiled faintly and looked at Lian Jiofeng. Lian Jiofeng, do you not have anything to tell your Lord Netherworld Emperor? Lian Jiofeng's eyes focused. His expression was extremely ugly. Speak, Lian. 7 Kills frowned and looked at Lian Jiofeng darkly. They had revived the Netherworld Emperor, but they had agreed to Nietian's harsh conditions. Moreover, Nietian had left behind the heavenly Tao seal in their bodies. If the Netherworld Emperor did not agree to Nietian's conditions, then Nietian could kill Lian Jiofeng and 7 Kills at any time. Lian Jiofeng's eyes trembled. He looked at the Netherworld Emperor and told him what had happened. Bang! At this time, the Netherworld Emperor's demonic energy had become violent to the extreme. With an explosion, he finally broke out of the sealed space. However, he stood where he was and stared at Nietian with bloodshot eyes. He was furious, but he did not attack. He had heard Lian Jiofeng's words. He had no choice but to look at Nietian in a new light. Even if Nietian left a mark on his face, he would suppress this great humiliation in his heart. Your Majesty, you heard what Lian Jiofeng said just now, didn't you? Nietian smiled faintly and said provocatively. Hearing Nietian's words, the Underworld Emperor's eyes darkened, a strong murderous intent surging in his eyes, but he still didn't move. At this moment, he wanted nothing more than to skin Nietian alive, eat his flesh, and drink his blood. However, he still endured it. At this moment, he felt a strong sense of threat from Nietian. Just now, Nietian even had the chance to kill him, but he just didn't do it. More importantly, Nietian had blazing 9-edge and 7 Kills lives in his hands. He didn't really care about blazing Jiofeng and 7 Kills, but if they died now, it would greatly weaken the heaven-punishing demon heart. Moreover, he needed Lian Jiofeng and 7 Kills help to recover his strength. Your Majesty, do you agree to my conditions? Seeing that the Underworld Emperor was silent, Nietian smiled cold and said. The Underworld Emperor's eyes darkened, and his trembling body finally calmed down. He looked at Nietian and said, This Emperor agrees to your conditions. Your Majesty is wise indeed. You have made the right choice. Nietian smiled faintly. The disdain in his voice was very obvious. Don't be too full of yourself, kid. This Emperor's agreement is only temporary. The Underworld Emperor smiled darkly. Your Majesty, what do you mean by that? Nietian frowned as killing intent surged in his eyes. He looked at blazing Jiofeng and 7 Kills. If the Underworld Emperor made any strange movements, he would kill blazing Jiofeng and 7 Kills immediately. The Underworld Emperor sneered and said, You want me to heal those with crippled vitality veins? I can't do it with my current strength. However, I can tell you that there is something that can heal any vitality vein and recover a cultivator's strength. What is it? Nietian's eyes trembled. An undisguisable heat appeared in his eyes. Manjasaka, the Underworld Emperor said expressionlessly. Manjasaka. Nietian's eyes focused, and he asked, Where is it? Saint Soul Region, Cloud Buddha Peak. The Underworld Emperor said gravely. Nietian's eyes trembled when he heard the Saint Soul Region. He thought for a moment and said, You have fulfilled this condition. In reality, Nietian was a little worried about letting the Underworld Emperor help Nie Dao and the others recover their vitality veins. If he could find something that could heal his Yuan meridians and restore his strength, that would be for the best. Coincidentally, this thing was in the Saint Soul region. This was good news for Nietian. You want me to recover Xueling's memories and let her choose her own path in the future. This is not a problem, but don't forget that Xueling only has 3 days left to live. Do your conditions have any meaning? The Underworld Emperor said coldly as he looked at Nietian. Whether it has any meaning or not is up to me. You only need to tell me if you agree or not. Niet Tianling responded coldly. The Underworld Emperor frowned and looked at Niet Tian darkly. He was silent for a long time before he said, You can take Xueling away. If she is still alive in 3 years, you can have her find me using the tear of the princess. At that time, I will recover her memories. When she recovers her memories, I will let her decide for herself whether she wants to stay by your side as your share or return to the heaven-punishing demon heart to become the heaven-punishing demon. Nietian looked at the Underworld Emperor and nodded after a while. He would use the heavenly sacred heart to save Cher. He could wait for 3 years and let Cher make her own choice. What about the 4th condition? Nietian looked at the Underworld Emperor and asked. Humph. The Underworld Emperor sneered. You are too naive to want me to give up the 9 regions. But I can promise you that I will not attack the 9 regions within 3 years. 3 years. Another 3 years. Nietian's eyes narrowed slightly. A strange smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he said, Netherworld Emperor, if my speculation is correct, it will take you 3 years to recover your strength, right? The Underworld Emperor's current strength was obviously not at his peak. After all, he had been sealed for hundreds of thousands of years and had just awakened. His strength could not be fully recovered. The Underworld Emperor asked Cher to find him after 3 years, and he only gave 3 years to the 9 regions. Obviously, he needed time to recover his strength. That's right. The Underworld Emperor smiled faintly and did not conceal anything. A cold glint appeared in his eyes. Nietian, I will remember you. The humiliation you left on me today will be repaid 100-fold in 3 years. Facing such a direct threat, Nietian smiled cold. Underworld Emperor, I will wait for you. The Underworld Emperor wanted to kill Nietian, and Nietian also wanted to kill him. Nietian, of course, wouldn't let go of what the Netherworld Emperor had done to Xuer. There was bound to be a battle to the death between him and the Underworld Emperor. The Underworld Emperor looked at Nietian, his eyes trembling. He did not expect Nietian to be so calm in front of him. Nietian's strong temperament was far beyond his expectations. You may leave. The Underworld Emperor looked cold at Nietian and said gravely. Nietian smiled faintly and left without lingering. Lian Jiufeng and 7 Kills looked at Nietian. They seemed to want to say something, but they did not. A moment later, Nietian left the devil-warding abyss. He found a hidden valley and carried Cher out of the 9 extreme mountains. He put Cher down gently and looked at the unconscious Cher with a dark expression. Right now, Cher was as pale as paper, and her aura was very weak. At that moment, Nietian's expression flickered as he discovered that a thin crack had appeared between Xuer's eyebrows. Chapter 2867. A glance of 3 lives, huh? Nietian looked at the mark between Cher's eyebrows and was stunned. The more he looked at it, the more he felt that it looked like an eye. A 3rd eye? Nietian looked at it for a long time and swallowed his saliva. The thin line that had appeared between Snow's brows looked too much like an eye. However, it was a vertical eye, and it was closed. Nietian felt that the eye would open at any time. Fat, does Cher have an innate abnormal pupil? Nietian couldn't help but ask after a while. That's strange, I don't know either. Fat Cat was also puzzled as she didn't know what the eye between Cher's eyebrows was. At that moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice suddenly rang out, filled with doubt and shock. Halfway through his sentence, he seemed to be too surprised and stopped. Could it be that the mark on this little girl's forehead is the legendary? What is it? Nietian and Fat Cat asked at the same time. Ghost Emperor's face was full of shock. After a few seconds of silence, he said, "A martial artist has two personalities, which represents the strongest martial talent. Do you know what it is?" Huh? Tian was stunned for a moment. His eyes narrowed as he suddenly thought of something and said, "A martial artist has two personalities. Is the martial path fate one of them?" When he entered Saint Soul Academy, Tian tested the Saint Soul Stone tablet and triggered the heaven-defying fate that was not allowed by the gods or demons appeared. Moreover, he knew that only a martial artist with great talent could have a martial path fate, since a warrior's dual grid represented the strongest martial Dao talent. The martial Dao life providence should be considered one of the dual grid. Yes, Ghost Emperor nodded and said, "The martial path fate is one of the martial artist's two personalities. It's a symbol of a martial artist talent that's relatively easy to detect. Corresponding to the martial path fate is another characteristic that's extremely difficult to detect, the heavenly path soul fate. Heavenly Dao soul lattice." Upon hearing these words, Tian's eyes trembled, and he was extremely shocked. Fat Cat was also very serious at this moment. He actually didn't know what the Ghost Emperor was talking about. After all, the Ghost Emperor was someone who once existed in the All-Heaven Sacred Realm. In certain aspects, even the Fat Cat did not know as much as the Ghost Emperor. At that moment, Tian's eyes flickered with a sharp light as he exclaimed, "Ghost Monarch, are you saying that the mark on Cher's forehead is the heavenly Dao soul spark?" "Yes." The Ghost Emperor nodded. "If I'm not wrong, this little girl should have the meridian of 3 lives, so her heavenly Dao fate should be the legendary 3 lives looking back." 3 lives looking back. Tian furrowed his brows, and his eyes trembled again. He was extremely surprised, and then he asked, "Is this a very powerful heavenly path soul lattice?" "Very powerful," the Ghost Emperor said in shock. "Although I don't know much about the heavenly path soul lattice, I know that the 3 lives looking back is one of the 5 most powerful soul lattices. The 5 most powerful heavenly path soul lattices." Tian's eyes narrowed slightly after hearing the Ghost Emperor's words. He didn't expect Cher's heavenly path soul lattice to be so powerful. Although he didn't know what the heavenly path soul lattice meant, he could tell from the Ghost Emperor's shock that the 3 lives looking back soul lattice was absolutely terrifying. One must know that the Ghost Emperor was an expert from the All-Heaven Sacred Realm. Even he was shocked by the heavenly path soul lattice, so one could imagine how powerful it was. "Ghost Emperor, what is the heavenly path soul lattice? What does a cultivator with the heavenly path soul lattice represent?" After a while, Tian became cold and asked with a frown. He really wanted to know what the heavenly path soul lattice, which was equally famous as the martial path fate lattice, meant. Most people think that the heavenly path soul lattice is the symbol of a cultivator's talent. However, according to what I know, a cultivator with the heavenly path soul lattice represents something even more terrifying, the Ghost Emperor said solemnly. He seemed to be thinking about something as he spoke. "What terrifying thing?" Tian furrowed his brows and asked with a fiery gaze. The Ghost Emperor was stunned for a moment before he said, "I don't know either. Even in the All-Heaven Sacred Realm, there aren't many people who know the secret of the heavenly path soul lattice. I once heard a mighty person say that the martial path fate lattice and the heavenly path soul lattice contain the ultimate meaning of a cultivator." Tian frowned. The Ghost Emperor's words confused him. He couldn't understand it at all. With his current strength, he still couldn't understand the heavenly path soul lattice. However, it wasn't a bad thing for Cher to have the heavenly path soul lattice. At that moment, the 3 lives examining gaze on Cher's forehead suddenly trembled. Then, a tremendous aura spread out and enveloped the entire valley. In the next moment, the 3 lives examining gaze actually opened. At that moment, Tian finally saw the true appearance of the 3 lives examining gaze. It wasn't an eye, but a circular halo of light. It was translucent like water or jade, giving off a pure and sacred feeling. Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at the 3 lives examining gaze. He was completely dumbfounded in that instant. In the 3 lives examining gaze, he seemed to see his past and present lives. It was as if he was living all over again. This feeling was too real. It wasn't an illusion at all. He was really seeing everything. This. After a while, Tion's eyes trembled. He reacted, his forehead already covered in sweat. Everything had happened in a very short period of time, but he felt like he had experienced an extremely long time. At that moment, his mentality seemed to have changed a little, making him feel an indescribable shock. At that moment, Cher's 3 lives examining gaze gradually closed. Her eyes actually opened. Cher! Seeing that Cher suddenly woke up, Tion's eyes trembled. He was pleasantly surprised. He didn't expect that Cher would actually wake up. The Emperor of the Netherworld transferred the heaven-punishing devil imprint to Cher through the tear of the princess. He even said that Cher would die within 3 days. Tion originally planned to use the Heavenly Path Sacred Heart to save Cher. But now, Cher actually woke up on her own. Tion. Cher's clear eyes flickered. Seeing that the person in front of her was Tion, she was pleasantly surprised. She actually stood up directly. In the next moment, she discovered that she was no longer in the anti-devil abyss. She smiled happily. Tion was stunned for a few seconds. He finally reacted and said in astonishment, Cher, are you all right? He saw that Cher's face wasn't as pale as before. Instead, it was very soft and glossy. Her complexion was very good. He couldn't figure out what was going on at all. How did Cher suddenly recover? I'm all right. Cher giggled. Her laughter was crisp and clear. She was like a teenage girl who was very curious about everything around her. Tion's face was filled with black lines. He couldn't say anything for a long time. After he calmed down, he carefully sensed Cher. He didn't discover anything abnormal. Only then did he relax. He didn't know what was going on, but he guessed that it should be related to Cher's 3 lives examining gaze. Chapter 2868. The Devil's Heart Sinner. Tion looked at Cher and thought for a long time. He could not figure out what was going on and could only give up. In any case, now that Snow was fine, it was a good thing for him. At this moment, Cher looked pure and flawless, just like the first time Tion had met her. However, Cher was already at the pinnacle of the godly state. But she really looked no different from a teenage girl. Tion, let's leave. Cher walked over and looked at Tion with her clear eyes. She was shy and her face was blushing. She was very cute. Tion nodded and smiled. He left with Cher. They quickly returned to the Wind and Cloud Alliance. Tion let Tian Kuei and Di Kuei leave. He planned to protect the Wind and Cloud Alliance personally and return to the Saint Soul region after the situation in the 9 regions stabilized. The mission given to him by the Saint Soul Academy did not specify a time. He could go back later. After returning to the Wind and Cloud Alliance, Cher stayed by Tion's side the whole time. For convenience, Tion built a small courtyard for Cher in the 9 extremities. This way, Cher would really follow him. Moreover, there was a young lady from the Heavenly Wings clan in the 9 extremities. She could be Cher's companion. A few days later, in the room, a ball of glazed light surged on Tion's palm and instantly formed a tower of light. It was the glazed pagoda. Ha! At this moment, a voice sounded from the glazed pagoda. It was Fat Cat. Suddenly, a ray of glazed light surged out. It was Fat Cat. Fat, how is it? Tion looked at Fat Cat and asked excitedly, I've already integrated with the heart of glazed glass. From now on, the artifact spirit of the glazed demon pagoda is me. Ha ha ha. The Fat Cat was very proud. The 8 tails behind its buttocks were wagging. A few days ago, Tion entered the glazed demon pagoda and helped Fat Cat obtain the heart of glaze. Now, the Fat Cat had fused with the heart of glaze and had successfully grown her 8th tail. Everything in the glazed demon pagoda was under the Fat Cat's control. Tion, you're pretty good yourself. You've already broken through to the 2nd Order Half-Saint realm. Fat Cat chuckled as he looked at Tion. After a few days of bitter cultivation, Tion's strength had reached the 2nd step Half-Saint realm. In just a few days, he had achieved another breakthrough. However, he was not satisfied with the speed of his advancement. He urgently needed to improve his strength, as the pressure on his shoulders was huge. Tion, don't feel too much pressure. Given your current state, You will reach the ninth order half-saint realm in a year at most. Fat Cat could see the worry in Nietion's heart and smiled faintly. Nietion nodded and did not say anything else. In his heart, he had an even faster plan. He hoped to reach the ninth order half-saint realm within 3 months. Following that, half a month passed. The situation in the 9 regions stabilized. The experts from the Wind and Cloud Alliance who had left previously returned after hearing that Nietion had killed Nangong, Jueming, and Hojoshin. Nietion accepted these people and left them in the Wind and Cloud Alliance to protect Nie Dao and the rest. After arranging everything, Nietion did not linger and prepared to return to the Sacred Soul region. He told Nie Dao and the rest that he would definitely return within 3 months. He did not tell Nie Dao about Nie Fenghua's situation. After all, even if Nie Dao knew about Nie Fenghua's situation, he would not be able to help and would only worry. Half a day later, Nietion returned to the Sacred Soul region. After handing in a mission, he headed towards the Ice-Fire Valley. Outside the Ice-Fire Valley, Hua Yiru's figure appeared, clearly waiting for Nietion. Elder Hua. Upon seeing Hua Yiru, Nietion greeted him and briefly explained what had happened in the 9 regions. Nangong Jueming, how shameless! Hua Yiru frowned and scolded after hearing Nietion's story. Although Nietion had downplayed it, he could imagine that returning to the 9 regions this time would be extremely dangerous. Elder Hua, I would like to ask you something. Nietion smiled faintly and said, Do you know where the Cloudy Buddha Peak is? The Cloudy Buddha Peak? When Hua Yiru heard this name, he could not help but frown. He looked at Nietion with a strange expression and asked, Why do you suddenly ask about this place? My grandfather's Yuan meridians were destroyed by Nangong Jueming. I want to find something that can help them recover their Yuan meridians and strength. Nietion did not hide anything and nodded. Manjusaka. Hua Yiru immediately reacted after hearing Nietion's words. His eyes could not help but tremble as he exclaimed. When Nietion heard the name Manjusaka from Hua Yiru's mouth, he could not help but be shocked. He had not mentioned Manjusaka, but Hua Yiru already knew about it. It seemed that the Emperor of the Netherworld did not lie to him. There was indeed Manjusaka on the Cloudy Buddha Peak, and Manjusaka could indeed help Nie Dao and the others recover their Yuan meridians and strength. Nietion, how do you know about Manjusaka? Who told you that Manjusaka is on the Cloudy Buddha Peak? Hua Yiru frowned and asked with a dark expression. The Emperor of the Netherworld. Nietion looked at Hua Yiru and could not help but frown. The Emperor of the Heaven-Punishing Clan, the owner of the Heaven-Punishing Demon Heart. Hua Yiru's eyes trembled again, and a trace of panic appeared on his face. Elder Hua, you know about the Emperor of the Netherworld? Nietion's eyes narrowed, and his face was full of shock. He did not expect Hua Yiru to know about the Emperor of the Netherworld. Judging from his reaction, he seemed to have a good understanding of the Emperor of the Netherworld. The Emperor of the Netherworld has been resurrected? Hua Yiru did not answer Nietion's question. Yes. Nietion nodded and told him about the Emperor of the Netherworld. Hua Yiru was flabbergasted. He had never expected that not only would Nietion kill Nangong Jueming, but he would also revive the owner of the heaven-punishing devil heart. Elder Hua, are you all right? Nietion could not help but have a bad feeling when he saw Hua Yiru's reaction. He did not know why Hua Yiru was so nervous and panicked all of a sudden. He was very curious as to how Hua Yiru knew about the Emperor of the Netherworld. Nietion, you know about the Saint Soul Sin Tablet, right? Hua Yiru's trembling eyes calmed down a little, but his expression was not good. Of course I know about it. Nietion nodded, and a trace of anger flashed in his eyes. He was not unfamiliar with the Saint Soul Sin Tablet, because Nie Fenghua had appeared at the Saint Soul Academy for the Saint Soul Sin Tablet. Nie Fenghua had almost lost his life in order to erase his name from the Saint Soul Sin Tablet. As for the Saint Soul Sin Tablet, Nietion was also very resentful. The Saint Soul Sin Tablet is one of the 3 sacred weapons of the Saint Soul Academy. Any cultivator whose name is inscribed on the Saint Soul Sin Tablet will have their martial Tao fate affected by the tablet. Hua Iru's eyes darkened. The Holy Soul Academy has been established for millions of years, but so far, only 3 names have been engraved on it. Your father, Nie Fenghua, is one of them. The other one is the owner of the heaven-punishing demon heart, the emperor of the netherworld. Nie Tian's eyes widened when he heard Hua Iru's words. He was extremely shocked. He did not expect the emperor of the netherworld to be a member of the Saint's Soul Academy. Furthermore, he was a traitor who had been inscribed on the Saint's Soul Sin Tablet. Chapter 2869. The Cloud Buddha Sect, Devil Heart Sinner. Nie Tian's eyes widened when he heard Hua Iru's words. The shock in his heart was written perfectly on his face. He had never imagined that the Emperor of the Underworld was once a student of the Saint's Soul Academy, and had even become a devil heart sinner. No wonder Hua Iru was so shocked when he heard the name of the Emperor of the Underworld. Nie Tian, do you know that of the 3 names on the Saint's Soul Sin Monument, the Emperor of the Underworld's name is the most unique? Hua Iru calmed down after a while, and said in a deep voice, "The names of your father and another person were carved by the Dean of the Saint's Soul Academy. As for the Emperor of the Underworld's name, his name automatically appeared on the Saint's Soul Sin Monument when the Emperor of the Underworld saw it for the first time." Devil Heart Sinner. Nie Tian was stunned, his face full of shock. He had never imagined that the Saint's Soul Sin Monument would automatically recognize the Emperor of the Underworld as a sinner. Hua Iru looked at Nie Tian and continued. Back then, this incident spread throughout the entire realm of Saint Soul. The Dean of the Saint's Soul Academy personally injured the Emperor of the Underworld and chased him out of the Saint's Soul domain. Nie Tian frowned when he heard this, and his expression turned ugly. From what Hua Iru had said, the Emperor of the Underworld's experience was somewhat similar to Nie Fenghua's. The only difference was that the Emperor of the Underworld's name automatically appeared on the Saint Soul Sin Monument and was directly chased out of the Saint Soul domain. No one knew what the Saint Soul Sin Monument sensed from the Emperor of the Underworld's body to carve his name on it. Nie Tian, Manjusaka does have the ability to restore broken yuan meridians and crippled strength. Moreover, Manjusaka is indeed on the Cloud Buddha Peak. However, the Emperor of the Underworld's motive for telling you this news is not simple. Hua Iru said in a deep voice as he looked at Nie Tian with a strange expression. Elder Hua, could the Emperor of the Underworld be plotting something? Nie Tian frowned, and his eyes flickered. Nie Tian, do you know who is living the Cloud Buddha Peak? Hua Iru's eyes narrowed as he asked in a deep voice. I don't know. Nie Tian shook his head. He didn't even know where the Cloudy Buddha Peak was. How could he possibly know who lived on the Cloudy Buddha Peak? Cloud Buddha Sure Clan. Hua Iru's eyes darkened as he said, Before I came to the Sacred Soul region, the Sacred Soul Academy didn't exist at that time. The one who controlled the Sacred Soul region was a powerful clan with an ancient inheritance called the Cloud Buddha Sure Clan. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed when he heard Hua Iru's words. He didn't expect the Cloud Buddha Sure Clan to be so powerful. They were once the rulers of the entire Sacred Soul region. What about the Cloud Buddha Sure Clan? Nie Tian nodded and looked at Hua Iru. Hua Iru chuckled, a look of pity on his face as he said, Millions of years ago, the Cloud Buddha Sure Clan suddenly went into seclusion for some unknown reason. The entire clan moved to the edge of the Sea of Bitterness and lived in seclusion in a mountain range in the sea there. From then on, that mountain in the sea was called the Cloud Buddha Peak. After the Cloud Buddha Sure Clan secluded themselves in the Cloud Buddha Peak, they rarely contacted the outside world. Therefore, very few people in the Sacred Soul region knew about the Cloud Buddha Sure Clan. Then how did the Emperor of the Netherworld know about the Cloud Buddha Sure Clan? Nie Tian asked with a frown. The Emperor of the Netherworld and the Cloud Buddha Sure Clan once had a grudge. Hua Iru said with a frown. A woman of the Cloud Buddha Sure Clan had a relationship with the Emperor of the Netherworld. But that woman had a special identity. Due to some reasons, she couldn't be with the Emperor of the Netherworld. Because of this, The Emperor of the Netherworld didn't hesitate to attack the Cloud Buddha Peak, but he couldn't save that woman in the end. So that's how it is. Nietan furrowed his brows and said with a gloomy face, "It seems that the Emperor of the Netherworld and the Cloud Buddha Shur clan are enemies." "You can say that." Hua Iru nodded with a smile. "Therefore, I feel that the Emperor of the Netherworld told you about the matter of Manjusaka. His purpose is not simple." Nietion's face was a bit unsightly. "I have no choice but to go to the Cloud Buddha Peak. Even if the Emperor of the Netherworld wants to use me to do something, I have no choice but to do it." Hua Iru's eyes glowed with a faint light. A string of Buddhist beads appeared in his hand. He handed it to Nietion and said, "I had some friendship with a member of the Cloud Buddha Shur clan. This string of Buddhist beads was given to me by him. Take it with you. Maybe it will be useful." "Thank you, Elder Hua." Nietion took the Buddhist beads and nodded to express his gratitude. He looked at the Buddhist beads in his hand. There were 22 Buddhist beads in total. Each Buddhist bead was black in color and had a layer of golden luster on its surface, making it look dazzling. "Nietion, stay at the Institute for a few days. I will arrange a mission for you to go to the Cloud Buddha Peak." Having said that, Hua Iru didn't stay any longer and left directly. 3 days later, Nietion's figure appeared outside the gate of the Holy Soul Institute. He was ready to go to the Cloud Buddha Peak right away. Nietion, the Cloud Buddha Peak is located at the edge of the Sea of Bitterness, in the southernmost area of the Holy Soul region. When you go there, you must be more careful. Remember not to have any conflict with the Cloud Buddha Shur clan. Hua Iru looked at Nietion and said with a serious expression, Nietion nodded and smiled. He knew what he was going to do. Of course, he didn't want to cause any trouble. Then, he didn't waste any more time. His figure moved like a stream of light, quickly disappearing into the sky. Hua Iru looked in the direction in which Nietion left. He didn't look relaxed. He had a hunch that Nietion's trip to the Cloud Buddha Peak would not be easy. 10 days later, in the southernmost area of the Holy Soul region, at the edge of the Sea of Bitterness, the boundless sea stretched for hundreds of thousands of miles. Looking from afar, it made people feel the vastness of the world. This was the Sea of Bitterness, the largest sea in the Holy Soul region. Above the Sea of Bitterness, there were countless islands like blackheads floating on the Sea of Bitterness. Coupled with the dim light above the Sea of Bitterness, it looked gloomy. The Sea of Bitterness had a harsh environment and thin divine power. Besides the locals of the Sea of Bitterness, few people would take the initiative to come to the Sea of Bitterness. Moreover, there was a legend about the Sea of Bitterness. In the immemorial age, the Sea of Bitterness was actually called the Cliff of Bitterness. It was said that it was a huge mountain with a circumference of hundreds of thousands of miles, towering above the clouds. In the immemorial age, there was an expert who was good at carving. He actually carved the Cliff of Bitterness into the image of his beloved. But later, this expert was betrayed by his beloved. In a rage, he slashed the Cliff of Bitterness with his sword, causing the earth veins to collapse. The entire Cliff of Bitterness actually split open and went straight into the ground. Later, after countless years of evolution, the Cliff of Bitterness became the current Sea of Bitterness. But this was just a legend. The warriors of the Holy Soul region didn't believe it. Imagine, the Cliff of Bitterness had a circumference of hundreds of thousands of miles, towering above the clouds. How vast was it? What kind of expert could carve the Cliff of Bitterness, split it open with a sword, and even cut off the earth veins? This kind of expert was too terrifying. Even the legendary sage might not be able to do it. However, there was a very strange thing about the Sea of Bitterness. Any warrior who came to the Sea of Bitterness would be suppressed by an invisible force. Even those peak pseudo-sage experts would be greatly suppressed when they came to the eye of the Sea of Bitterness. But those who were born in the Sea of Bitterness were not suppressed at all. It was very strange. At this time, a huge golden figure appeared in the sky above the Sea of Bitterness. It was a huge golden Leo, and on the golden Leo, there were 3 figures, a silver-haired young man and 2 young girls. Chapter 2870. A domineering youth, We've finally arrived at the Sea of Misery horizon. Tian stood up and gazed into the distance with a gratified smile on his face. They had set off from Saint Sol Academy and had flown nonstop for 10 days before finally arriving at the Sea of Misery horizon. He hadn't expected the Sea of Misery horizon to be so far away, and what was even more unexpected was that it was so vast. "Cher, Xiaoya, we're here," Tian said to Cher and Xiaoya with a faint smile. Xiaoya was the girl from the Heavenly Feather clan that Tian had saved from the hands of the Xintian crown prince, Xiaotang. Actually, he didn't know Xiaoya's real name because she was a mute. However, Cher and Xiaoya got along quite well. Cher could easily tell what Xiaoya wanted to do. But at this moment, Xiaoya came to Tian's side. Her delicate little face was very nervous. She gestured with her hands and made noises, but she couldn't say anything. She didn't know what to say. "What's wrong?" Tian couldn't help but frown when he saw Xiaoya's reaction. He had a strange expression on his face. "Tian, Xiaoya says that this place makes her feel very uncomfortable. Can we leave?" Cher stepped forward and frowned. "I also feel that the air here is very dirty and turbid. What are we doing here?" Tian looked at the two girls and couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "I'm here to do something very important. If you can't adapt to the environment here, you can return to the 9 extremities." Xiaoya nodded repeatedly when she heard Tian's words. At the same time, she gestured anxiously. Tian understood Xiaoya's gesture. She wanted him to enter the 9 superbs as well. "Xiaoya, I can't enter the 9 extremities. You and Cher should go in." Tian smiled bitterly as he took out the 9 extremities. Boom! However, right at this moment, a gigantic water pillar suddenly rose from the surface of the sea in the distance. Like a water dragon, it soared into the sky with a majestic aura tens of thousands of meters tall. Tian sensed that something was amiss. His eyes narrowed, and he turned around. At this time, he clearly saw that it was not a water column at all, but a giant octopus. Its body was hundreds of meters long, and its tentacles were thousands of meters long. That giant octopus was like a demon king, releasing a terrifying aura that was incomparably berserk. It actually formed a black mist in the air. What a big fella. When Tian saw the giant octopus, his lips curled into a smile. There was not much of an expression on his face. Swoosh! Right at this moment, the giant octopus suddenly moved. One of its tentacles swung out like a steel whip, piercing through the air and slashing towards Tian and the others. The berserk energy was extremely terrifying, as if the space itself was about to be torn apart. However, Tian stood where he was. His expression did not change at all. He did not care about the giant octopus at all. Faster. However, right at this moment, a tyrannical voice resounded in the sky. Then, a gigantic shadow of a fist appeared, piercing through the air and landed heavily on the giant octopus's body. Bang! A muffled sound was heard. The giant octopus's body was hit by a tremendous force, and it directly flew down and landed heavily on the surface of the sea. Pow! The moment the giant octopus landed on the surface of the sea, it was hit by a tremendous force from the surface of the sea. Numerous bloody wounds appeared on its body. Instantly, the surrounding 10,000 meters of the sea was dyed the color of blood. Tian narrowed his eyes and looked into the distance. What he saw was a muscular young man with a bare upper body. The young man was standing on a giant seabird. His eyes were shining brightly, and he looked very fierce. In the next moment, his figure suddenly moved. With a stomp of his feet, he actually leaped and rushed towards the surface of the sea where the giant octopus had landed. His figure was like a swordfish, piercing straight into the bitter sea and disappeared without a trace. Oh! When Xiaoya saw this scene, she cried out in surprise. She seemed to be frightened and extremely nervous. Tian, however, had a calm expression. Since this young man dared to enter the sea, he must be very powerful. Also, from the way he knocked down the giant octopus with one punch, he was definitely not a weakling. Boom! Bang, bang, bang. Then huge waves surged continuously on the surface of the sea. The giant octopus's tentacles appeared on the surface of the sea from time to time. Moments later, the sea was calm again, and a young man appeared on the surface of the sea, holding a blood-red beast core in his hand. It was obvious that the giant octopus had been killed by him in the sea. Nietian looked at the young man and sent out his divine sense, a faint smile playing at the corner of his mouth. The young man wasn't weak. He was already a peak paramount god. Considering his age, even in the sacred spirit domain, he would definitely be considered a freakishly talented genius. Who are you people? At this time, the young man's figure moved, and he directly came to Nietian's side. His eyes flickered, and he asked loudly, as if he were berating Nietian. Passers-by, Nietian replied with a faint smile. The young man frowned. His gaze swept across Shui, and Xiaoya, but eventually he fixed his eyes on Nietian. He seemed to be very angry, and said, "Do you know that this is the Bitter Sea shore? Outsider's strength will be suppressed here. That giant octopus was more than enough to kill you. If I hadn't gotten there in time, you would already be dead." "Many thanks," Nietian said with a faint smile, his expression as calm as ever. The young man was right. When he had first arrived at the shore of the Bitter Sea, he had already sensed that the space here was different from the other places in the Sacred Soul region. There is a strange power in the space here that had an extremely strong suppression on a cultivator's yuan meridians. However, this young man's strength wasn't suppressed at all, which was very strange. "Who are you? What's your relationship with these two girls? What business do you have here in the Sea of Bitterness?" Seeing that Nietian was being polite, the young man's expression softened a bit. However, his tone was cold and interrogative. "I came to the Sea of Bitterness to run some errands. These two girls here are my wife and my little sister." Nietian smiled faintly at how overbearing this young man was. However, he didn't get angry. Instead, he answered patiently, "Wife, little sister?" The young man was stunned. He looked at Cher and Xiaoya in disbelief. Cher smiled and said to the young man, "Little brother, I'm Cher. He's Nietian, my husband. She's Xiaoya, my little sister." After Cher left the anti-magic abyss, she slowly returned to normal. She didn't only have one day's memory anymore. The young man looked at Cher and thought for a long time. After a long time, he said, "I'm Sea Dragon King, not little brother." "Oh." Cher smiled and said seriously, "Hello, Sea Dragon King." The young man named Sea Dragon King nodded his head. Then, he looked at Xiaoya and asked, "Why isn't she talking?" "Oh." Xiaoya took a step forward and opened her mouth. However, she suddenly saw something and her face became shocked. Chapter 2871. Giant-toothed octopus. The Sea Dragon King instantly felt the danger, and his expression changed. He looked down and saw that the giant tentacle was already attacking him. He had nowhere to retreat and was forced to fight back. Boom! The Sea Dragon King's reaction was extremely fast. He reacted in an instant and punched downwards. A huge fist shadow whistled through the air and smashed towards the incoming tentacles. Pump! In the next instant, the fist shadow fell, but was directly bombarded by the huge tentacle and shattered. "Be careful!" Cher saw this, and her expression changed as she screamed. However, it was already too late when she finished speaking. The Sea Dragon King's body was entangled by the huge hand, and his entire figure disappeared. At this moment, Nietian's eyes narrowed. Just as he was about to attack, he felt a violent force coming towards him from behind. He suddenly turned around and saw 6 or 7 tentacles appearing. They danced in the air like a giant dragon and attacked him ferociously. He did not even look at them. He moved his body, and several sword essences gushed out, turning into sharp sword shadows and whizzing out. In the next moment, wherever the sword shadows passed, there was blood, and the 6 or 7 tentacles were all cut off. Immediately after, Nietian took a step forward and slapped down with his palm. The palm shadow appeared, and the tentacle that entangled the Sea Dragon King was also cut off. "Break!" The Sea Dragon King roared, and the huge tentacles that were coiling around his body were shattered into a bloody light. He stabilized his body and looked at Nietian in shock. He was extremely shocked. He did not expect Nietian to be so powerful. He could easily cut off the giant tentacle of the giant toothed octopus. These giant toothed octopuses were huge and strong. Moreover, there were huge bony teeth on the back of each tentacle. Hence, they were called the giant toothed octopus. Normally, the combat power of an ordinary giant toothed octopus was equivalent to a pinnacle stage supreme god. Take the Sea Dragon King, for example. He had already used all his strength to kill the giant toothed octopus. As for those foreign martial artists, if they wanted to kill a large-toothed octopus, they would need to be at least at the peak of the god realm. The Sea Dragon King stared at Nietian suspiciously. He felt that Nietian was not much older than him. Could he be a god-state peak martial artist? Only now did he realize that he hadn't acted to save Nietian at all. That was because Nietian didn't need saving at all. Even if another 8 or 10 large-toothed octopuses came, Nietian would be able to deal with them easily. Sea Dragon King, are you all right? Nietian looked at the stunned Sea Dragon King and asked with a faint smile. No, I'm fine. The Sea Dragon King then reacted and shook his head awkwardly. He did not forget to say, Thank you. Dragon King, be careful. At this moment, a voice sounded in the sky. It was extremely flustered. Hua! Just as the voice was heard, a giant water column appeared on the surface of the sea. It was like a white sharp sword, and it headed straight for the Sea Dragon King. Nietian's gaze froze, and his face changed. He could clearly see that the water column was actually a giant octopus tentacle. This tentacle was estimated to be at least 10,000 meters long. It was hard to imagine how big this large-toothed octopus was. The Sea Dragon King was stunned for a moment. Immediately after, he felt a terrifying force enveloping him. He wanted to retaliate, but he was shocked to realize that the violent force around him made it difficult for him to circulate his Yuan meridian. At this critical moment, Nietian took a step forward and flew over. His skyward armor appeared on his body. Bang! Immediately after, the giant octopus tentacle landed and hit the skyward armor. It actually made Nietian's body retreat a few meters. However, the appearance of Nietian helped the Sea Dragon King to block the fatal blow. In the next moment, a huge suction force appeared in the void and pulled Nietian and the Sea Dragon King up at the same time. The two of them stabilized themselves and arrived at a higher altitude. Beside them stood a middle-aged man in black. He was tall and sturdy, had a full beard, and looked very boorish. Father! The Sea Dragon King was still in shock. When he saw the middle-aged man behind him, his eyes lit up and he shouted. This middle-aged man was none other than the Sea Dragon King's father, Haidachuan. Behind the middle-aged man, there were a dozen middle-aged men and a dozen young men. They seemed to be his subordinates. Dragon King, are you all right? Haidachuan took a step forward and asked the Sea Dragon King anxiously. Young Island Master, are you all right? The others also asked anxiously. I'm fine. The Sea Dragon King looked at Nietian and seemed a little embarrassed. Nietian smiled faintly and thought to himself, seems like the identity of this Sea Dragon King is not simple. He is actually the young Island Master. Haidachuan reacted at this moment. He immediately looked at Nietian and said, Little brother, I am the Island Master of the Sea Dragon Island, Haidachuan. Thank you for saving the Dragon King. He sensed the strength of Nietian and frowned. He seemed to be a little surprised. He did not expect Nietian to have the strength of a second-rank half-sage. No wonder he could block the attack of the giant-toothed octopus king. The giant-toothed octopus king that attacked the Sea Dragon King just now had tentacles that were more than 10,000 meters long. It was the giant-toothed octopus king. The giant-toothed octopus king's strength was equivalent to a half-sage martial artist of the Cliff of Bitterness. One attack was enough to kill the Sea Dragon King. Luckily, Nietian acted in time. Otherwise, the Sea Dragon King would be a corpse. Nietian looked at Haidachuan and smiled faintly. He said, Island Master is too polite. The Sea Dragon King also saved my life just now. We are even now. When the Sea Dragon King heard Nietian's words, he blushed and felt a little embarrassed. Little brother, wait here. Leave the big guy below to me." Haidachuan laughed. After speaking, his figure moved. The saber intent in his body was wild. It was like a huge saber charging towards the giant-toothed octopus king. Tian smiled faintly. He looked at Haidachuan's figure and was not very worried. Haidachuan had the strength of a 5th-rank half-sage. It should not be a problem for him to deal with the giant-toothed octopus king. Boom! Haidachuan's figure was like a dragon. Wild intent surged around him. A huge black saber appeared in his hand, and he slashed horizontally. In the void, a huge saber shadow appeared and slashed downwards. It was like a waterfall of light falling from the sky. Haidachuan was a legendary saber user. Coupled with his strength of a 5th-rank half-sage, the might of his slash was very terrifying. Boom! In the next moment, the saber shadow slashed downwards and landed on the body of the giant-toothed octopus king. Suddenly, the saber chi on the surface of the sea scattered wildly. Blood and flesh were everywhere. It was a tragic sight. The huge body of the giant-toothed octopus king had several tentacles smashed into pieces. Island Lord is so strong. When the people of the Sea Dragon Island saw this scene, their eyes trembled and their faces were full of surprise. Haidachuan almost killed the giant-toothed octopus king with one slash. His strength was really shocking. The injured giant-toothed octopus king rolled for a while and sank into the sea. Haidachuan laughed loudly. He moved and was ready to leave. However, at this moment, the surface of the sea suddenly started to shake. Boom! 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 In the next moment, more than 10 giant-toothed octopus kings appeared at the same time. They were even bigger than the previous one. Moreover, there was a giant-toothed octopus king among them. There was even a giant-toothed octopus king that was bigger than a normal giant-toothed octopus king. Judging from its head, its tentacles were at least 20,000 meters long. Chapter 2872. Chapter 2867. The end is shocking. Attack Haidachuan looked at the giant octopus on the sea and could not help but tremble in fear. He had severely injured a giant-toothed octopus king, but he did not expect more than a dozen of them to appear, and there was even a giant-toothed octopus emperor. The strength of a giant-toothed octopus king was equivalent to a low-level half-sage, but the strength of a giant-toothed octopus emperor was equivalent to a high-level half-sage. Haidachuan was a 5th-rank half-sage, so killing a few giant-toothed octopus kings was not a problem. But it was dangerous to fight against a giant-toothed octopus emperor. Island Lord! The sudden change in the sea made the people of the Sea Dragon Island tremble violently, and then they cried out in fear. All of them were very nervous. Father! The Sea Dragon King saw that Haidachuan was in danger and shouted in panic. Everyone retreat. Haidachuan raised his head and shouted. Then he moved and wanted to fly to the sky. With his strength, he had no chance of winning against more than a dozen giant-toothed octopus kings and a giant-toothed octopus emperor. So he had to escape. As long as he could escape to the sky, he would be safe. Boom! 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 However, the moment Haidachuan's figure moved, more than a dozen huge tentacles with huge teeth shot up into the sky. They were like huge steel whips. The huge fangs appeared and swung toward Haidachuan in unison. In an instant, Haidachuan felt a violent force enveloping him, and he could not help but narrow his eyes. In the next moment, he reacted and turned his body. The violent saber in his hand swept around, and the violent saber will turn into a sky full of saber shadows, slashing towards the giant tentacles. Bang! Bang! Countless saber shadows bloomed in the sky, and the saber radiance was shocking. The surrounding space was dripping with blood. More than a dozen giant tentacles were hit by the saber radiance, and they were badly mutilated, retreating one after another. Haidachuan's mouth twitched, and then he moved and rushed to the sky. Puff! However, at this moment, a ray of black light suddenly shot out from the surface of the sea. It was extremely sharp, and before Haidachuan could even react, a horrifying wound was left on his chest. Immediately, blood gushed out. What was even more terrifying was that the wound was black in color. Even the blood that flowed out was black. It was very obvious that the black glow that Hai Dachuan was struck by was extremely poisonous. Black poison marlin. Hai Dachuan felt a numbing energy appear in his body. His body was rapidly turning numb. His eyes couldn't help but tremble as he cried out in alarm. Oh no, the island lord is injured. Damn it, it's the terrifying black poison marlin. Island lord has been poisoned. Hurry up and save the island lord. When the people of the Sea Dragon Island saw this, their eyes trembled. They shouted and prepared to save Hai Dachuan. Don't come over. However, Hai Dachuan let out a roar at this moment. His body flickered as blood chi permeated the air around him. Within the blood-colored blade light, there was a trace of blackness. In order to prevent his body from being paralyzed by the black poison marlin's poison, he actually ignited his own blood and chi. Swoosh! However, at this moment, a loud roar suddenly came from the sea. Then, a huge monster rushed into the sky, tens of thousands of meters high. That huge thing looked like a mass of rotten meat that was about to rot. It was nearly a kilometer in circumference. Boom! Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the next instant, the gigantic creature's body moved, and 8 gigantic tentacles that were tens of thousands of meters long extended out at the same time. The surrounding space abruptly trembled, and terrifying waves rose on the surface of the sea. Oh no! Hai Dachuan's eyes trembled. His expression suddenly changed, and he looked extremely horrified. At this moment, what appeared in front of him was the giant-fanged octopus emperor. He reacted almost instinctively and slashed out with his blade. Bang! However, the moment the huge blade shadow blasted out, it was directly smashed into pieces by a giant tentacle. The strength of the giant-fanged octopus emperor was too strong. If Hai Dachuan was in his peak state, he still had a chance to block the attack of the octopus emperor. However, he was poisoned, and his strength was suppressed. There was no way he could fight against the octopus emperor. Swoosh! In the next moment, a huge tentacle swung over. Blood chi around Hai Dachuan's body raged and condensed into a blade intense shield. However, even the blade intense shield was wrapped up by the huge tentacle. At this moment, the giant-fanged octopus emperor moved its body and dived towards the sea. Oh no! Seeing this scene, everyone's expression changed at the same time, and they exclaimed. It was obvious that the giant-fanged octopus emperor wanted to pull Hai Dachuan into the sea. If that was the case, Hai Dachuan would definitely die. Once in the sea, with the strength of the giant-fanged octopus emperor, even a rank 9 half-sage might not be able to withstand it. Father, the sea dragon king howled. Then he moved and actually wanted to rush down. However, at this moment, a huge force directly pulled him back, making him unable to move. Let go of me. The sea dragon king turned around abruptly and saw that the person who pulled him back was Nietion. His eyes were red, and he roared like a ferocious beast. Step back. Let me save the island lord, Nietion replied faintly. After which, he exerted a little force and threw the sea dragon king into the sky. In the next moment, his body moved. Sword intent surged around him and filled the sky. It was as if a sword god had descended to the world. So strong. The people of the Sea Dragon Island were shocked and looked at Nietion in shock. They did not expect this inconspicuous silver-haired young man to be so strong. 8 Desolation's sword. Nietion was in midair. The corner of his mouth twitched a little, and he struck with his sword. The sword's shadow swooped down like a dragon, breaking the abyss. Woo! Below, the giant-fanged octopus emperor seemed to have felt threatened and actually let out a strange cry. Boom, boom. However, at this moment, the terrifying sword's shadow fell from the sky. In midair, blood and flesh splattered everywhere. One of the giant tentacles of the giant-fanged octopus emperor was forcefully broken. The horrifying scene in front of them made everyone from the Sea Dragon Island tremble violently and suck in a mouthful of cold air. They did not expect Nietion's combat power to be so shocking. Nietion's sword was shocking. The body of the giant-fanged octopus emperor was terrifying. Yet, Nietian could actually break one of its tentacles. One could imagine the power of the sword. Alan Lord, are you all right? Nietian's body moved. Sword intent surged around him, and he came to Hai Dachuan's side. Little brother, I'm fine. Hai Dachuan's face was pale, but he could not hide the shock in his heart. He looked at Nietian with dull eyes. Although he said he was fine, the wound on his chest was getting more and more horrifying. It was extremely dirty. Nietian's eyes narrowed slightly. Then he turned his palm, and a majestic dragon chi gushed out of his palm and rushed into Hai Dachuan's body. A dragon roar immediately sounded in the void. Puff! Hai Dachuan's body trembled, and he spat out a mouthful of poisonous blood. His pale face turned a little better, and the wound on his chest also recovered. Nietian used pure dragon chi to force the black poison marlin toxins out of Hai Dachuan's body. Little brother, thank you very much. Hai Dachuan was extremely surprised. He looked at Nietian for a few seconds before he remembered to thank him. Nietian smiled faintly and said, Island Lord, you can step back. Leave this to me. Chapter 2873. The Mastermind Boom. 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 The giant-fanged octopus emperor was thoroughly enraged after losing one of its tentacles to Nietian. Its huge body moved, and 3 of its tentacles lashed out, creating a deafening roar in the air, as though the space was about to be torn apart. Nietian narrowed his eyes, and the astral soul wings appeared on his back. His figure flickered a few times and dodged the attack of the Emperor Octopus. He was a second-step half-saint, but his actual combat strength could easily face a 9th-step half-saint or even stronger opponent. The shore of the Bitter Sea had a strange suppressive force. However, this suppressive force was very obvious to other martial artists, but it did not suppress Nietian too much. His star power was not suppressed in any way. Furthermore, his Supreme Dragon Vein also had a strong suppression effect on the suppressive power. Therefore, even in the Cliff of the Bitter Sea, his combat strength was still far stronger than the 5th-step half-saint, Hai Dachuan. What a fast speed! Hai Dachuan quickly retreated to the side. Seeing how easily Nietian dodged the attack of the giant-fanged octopus emperor, his eyes couldn't help but tremble. He had already sensed that Nietian was a second-step half-saint, but he didn't expect the latter's strength to be so terrifying. An ordinary second-step half-saint wouldn't even be able to defeat a peak immortal realm cultivator in the Cliff of the Bitter Sea. But Nietian didn't seem to be suppressed at all. It was too terrifying. Woo! At this time, the giant-fanged octopus emperor was even more enraged. It let out a strange cry and stretched out several tentacles, shaking the void. Nietian's expression was calm. He smiled and stepped out of the void. After a few flashes, he actually dashed towards the giant-fanged octopus emperor. Seeing this scene, the faces of the people on the Sea Dragon Island changed, and they started discussing in horror. My God, what is that guy trying to do? Is he going to kill the giant-fanged octopus emperor? With his speed, he can easily avoid the king octopus. Why is he taking the initiative to approach it? Isn't he courting death? That's right. The emperor's body is tough, and this fellow is only a second-stage half-saint. If he gets hit by the tentacles, even if he doesn't die, he'll be heavily injured. The eyes of everyone trembled as they discussed animatedly, yet their gazes stared fixedly at Nietian's figure as if they were deeply afraid of missing something. 9 limits of the starry sky. Kill. At this time, Nietian's figure came to a place less than 10,000 meters away from the giant Fong octopus emperor. The corner of his mouth twitched as he murmured. Then he directly stabbed out with his sword. Suddenly, a violent sword will whistled out, condensing into a sword shadow in the air, blasting towards the giant Fong octopus emperor. Woo! In an instant, the giant-toothed octopus emperor sensed danger. It let out a strange cry and rolled its huge body, retreating. However, it was too late. The moment the sword shadow landed, it had directly pierced through the head of the giant-toothed octopus emperor. Blood, flesh, and brain matter flew everywhere. This horrifying scene caused everyone's eyes to tremble. They were extremely shocked and speechless. This scene was too horrifying. Nietion's sword had directly pierced through the giant-toothed octopus emperor. This sword had directly ended the life of the giant-toothed octopus emperor. If they had not seen it with their own eyes, they would not have dared to believe this scene. A second-stage half-saint had killed the giant-toothed octopus emperor with a sword. This was too unbelievable. The most unbelievable thing was that this second-stage half-saint was not a martial artist from ashore of the Bitter Sea, but a foreign martial artist. At this time, the small face of the Sea Dragon King was dumbfounded. He felt that the scene in front of him was not real, but an illusion. Nietion's strength was beyond his imagination. Nietion, be careful. However, just as Nietion killed the giant-toothed octopus emperor with a sword, a panicked voice suddenly sounded. It was Cher. Puff! As soon as Er's voice rang out, a streak of black light appeared and shot directly towards Nietion. Nietion's brows furrowed. He flapped the wings on his back and tilted his body slightly. The black streak of light brushed past his face. I'm finally out. The next moment, he stabilized his body. His eyes focused and locked onto a black figure in the shallow layer of the sea. At this moment, Nietion's figure moved. The wings on his back shook, and he shot towards the surface of the sea like an arrow. Rumble. The sword aura around him was turbulent and extremely violent. The impact on the surface of the sea caused a huge whirlpool to appear. In the center of the whirlpool, a black figure appeared. It was a black poison marlin that was more than 10 meters long. The body of the black poison marlin was not big, but its beast body was strong and it was extremely fast. In addition to the poison in its body, it was even scarier than the giant-toothed octopus emperor. Just now, it was the one that severely injured Haidachuan and almost injured Nietion. Nietion's eyes locked onto the black poison marlin. Only then did he see the latter's appearance clearly. Its body was black, and its body was like a shark. However, there was a very sharp poisonous sting on its head that could release black poisonous light. It really is the black poison marlin. Zhong Yin, who was above, saw the scene, and his eyes trembled violently. He could not help but exclaim. They were very curious. The black poison marlin was a deep-sea beast. Why would it appear in the shallow waters? However, at this time, everyone was more concerned about how Nietion would deal with the black poison marlin. Damn it, I actually let it escape. Nietion looked at the black poison marlin and frowned. The corners of his mouth twitched. Then he blasted out with his sword. Where the sword's shadow fell, there was a bloody light. The black poison marlin was directly killed by his sword. The most terrifying thing about the black poison marlin was its speed, but Nietion used the demonic eye to freeze the space so that the black poison marlin could not escape. Even the giant-toothed octopus emperor could not withstand his sword, let alone a black poison marlin. After killing the black poison marlin with one sword strike, there was no joy on Nietion's face. Instead, he was very worried. In fact, before he made a move, he had already sensed that there was an aura lurking in the sea. The reason why he did not make a move at the first moment was that he was afraid of the aura hidden in the water. Moreover, he did not want to cause more trouble and delay his journey to the Cloud Buddha Peak. However, Haidachuan and the others were not bad. It would be difficult for him to just stand by and watch. Everything that happened just now was controlled by the person behind the scenes hiding in the water. Obviously, that person came for Haidachuan and the others. He wanted Haidachuan's life. Who did Haidachuan offend? After Nietion killed the black poison marlin, the sea quickly became calm. The smell of blood quickly dissipated as if nothing had happened. Brother Nietion, are you all right? Nietion moved and returned to the golden centipede. The Sea Dragon King came to his side and asked with a shocked expression. Nietion smiled faintly and shook his head to indicate that he was fine. At this moment, Haidachuan and the others also came over. They all looked at Nietion in shock. My friend Nietion, thank you so much just now. Haidachuan stepped forward and said solemnly, Alan Lord, you are too kind. Nietion smiled faintly and looked calm. My friend Nietion, you have just arrived at the shore of the Bitter Sea, right? Haidachuan looked at Nie Tian with a strange expression. Yes. Nie Tian nodded. He could tell that Haidachuan wanted to say something. Chapter 2874. A Provocation? Hearing Haidachuan mention Manjusaka, Nie Tian couldn't help but narrow his eyes. Then, a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he said, Lord Island Lord, how did you know I came here from Manjusaka? Little friend Nie Tian, you really came from Manjusaka. Haidachuan's eyes trembled when he heard Nie Tian's words. His face revealed an unconcealable panic. Nie Tian nodded and said with a faint smile, Yeah. How did you figure out, Lord Sectmaster? Haidachuan's face was ugly. He heaved a long sigh and said, The sea of bitterness horizon has a harsh environment and thin divine power. Moreover, it is located in the extreme south of the Saint Spirit region. Outsiders who come here will be suppressed by the special power of the sea of bitterness horizon. In the entire Saint Spirit region, very few people are willing to come to the sea of bitterness horizon. Every year, most of the cultivators who come to the sea of bitterness horizon come from Manjusaka. It's no wonder. After all, Manjusaka's fame is too great. Who doesn't want a legendary, immemorial sacred flower? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed when he heard Haidachuan's words. His face revealed a doubtful expression. He really didn't know that Manjusaka was the immemorial sacred flower. Little friend Nie Tian, don't tell me you don't know that Manjusaka is the immemorial sacred flower? Haidachuan frowned when he saw Nie Tian's doubtful expression. Nie Tian smiled bitterly and shook his head, saying, I really didn't know that Manjusaka is the immemorial sacred flower. I want Manjusaka to save someone. Haidachuan frowned and felt that Nie Tian shouldn't be lying. He shook his head and sighed. Little friend Nie Tian, I'm afraid you've come in vain. The Cloudy Buddha Sher clan has sealed the Cloudy Buddha Peak thousands of years ago, forbidding anyone from entering. In the past, there were powerhouses who charged into the Cloud Buddha Peak in order to obtain Manjusaka. All of them died tragically in the end. Haidachuan shook his head again and said, I admit that young friend Nie Tian's strength is indeed extraordinary, but which of those martial artists who came to find Manjusaka isn't powerhouse? The final result is still the same. Therefore, I advise my young friend Nie Tian to leave the sea of bitterness. Don't waste your time on Manjusaka. Nie Tian smiled and said with an indifferent expression, Thank you, Island Master, for telling me. However, Manjusaka is too important to me. I must have it. Haidachuan was stunned. He wanted to say something, but when he felt the determination in Nie Tian's eyes, he didn't say anything in the end. Subsequently, Haidachuan invited Nie Tian to the Sea Dragon Island, and Nie Tian didn't refuse. He knew that it wouldn't be easy to find Manjusaka. It would be better to stay at the Sea Dragon Island for the time being and figure out the situation at the Sea of Bitterness first. Also, Nie Tian felt that the mastermind just now wouldn't let Haidachuan off. He really wanted to see who this person was. Big brother Nie Tian, let's go. When the Sea Dragon King heard that Nie Tian wanted to go to the Sea Dragon Island, he was very excited and said, Our Sea Dragon Island is a good place. Big brother Nie Tian will definitely like it there. Nie Tian nodded with a smile and followed Haidachuan and the others to the Sea Dragon Island. Soon, Nie Tian and the others arrived at the sky above the Sea Dragon Island. Below them was a small green island. At a glance, it was verdant and full of vitality. It was the Sea Dragon Island. After a while, Haidachuan and the others brought Nie Tian into the Sea Dragon Island. Along the way, the people on the island were surprised to see Nie Tian and the others. They even took the initiative to greet them and were very enthusiastic. Nie Tian's lips curled up slightly, and he thought to himself, The people here are simple and honest. Living here is indeed pleasant. Following which, Nie Tian and the others came to a small courtyard on the island. Although it was simple, it was very clean and made people feel very comfortable. Little friend Nie Tian, you guys can stay here. The conditions on the island aren't good. Please don't mind. Haidachuan said very politely, What are you saying, Island Lord? I can't even thank Island Lord for your hospitality. Nie Tian smiled faintly and turned around to let Cher and Xiaoya into the small courtyard. Rumble. However, at this moment, a huge explosion sounded in the sky. It was like a sudden clap of thunder. Nietian frowned and looked at the sky. He saw a martial artist standing there. His aura was surging and very violent. Dark clouds were surging around his body, and the wind was fierce. This martial artist looked very young. He had sharp eyebrows and bright eyes. His facial features were handsome, and he looked very heroic. It's young Master Muley. Someone below recognized the identity of this martial artist and shouted in surprise. Brother-in-law. See, Dragon King's eyes trembled as he shouted excitedly. Dragon King, don't shout. However, Hai Dachuan glared at Sea Dragon King and said, He is not your brother-in-law yet. Father, it's fine. Anyway, Brother Muley and sister are engaged. He will be my brother-in-law sooner or later. Sea Dragon King laughed and said. Hai Dachuan glared at Sea Dragon King fiercely. It was obvious that he was very angry. However, he did not say anything. On the other side, when the others saw Muley, they were very happy and started discussing. It's young Master Muley from Thunder Island. No wonder there's such a huge commotion. Young Master Muley is indeed Lord Tai Chingfeng's disciple. He is already a stage 1 half-sage at such a young age. That's right. Look at young Master Muley's aura. I'm afraid he is not weaker than a stage 2 half-sage. That's right. Young Master Muley is one of the top 10 geniuses of our 9 Dragons 100 Islands. Such an outstanding martial artist is about to become Miss Hai Meixiang's husband. Our Sea Dragon Island is really going to bask in his glory. Speaking of which, young Master Muley and Miss Hai Meixiang are childhood sweethearts. When young Master Muley was young, he grew up in our Sea Dragon Island. He and Miss Hai Meixiang are really a match made in heaven. As the crowd spoke, they looked at Muley with blazing eyes filled with admiration. When Yitian heard the crowd's words, he smiled and thought to himself, even if this Muley is the son-in-law of Sea Dragon Island, there is no need for him to appear in such a high-profile manner. Son-in-law Muley greets father-in-law. At this moment, Muley, who was high up in the sky, opened his mouth and shouted loudly. At the same time, he bowed slightly to Hai Dachuan. His tones sounded very respectful, but there was not the slightest bit of respect in his eyes. Instead, there was a trace of contempt. Muley, you and Meixiang are not married yet. I, Hai Dachuan, am not worthy of you calling me father-in-law. Hai Dachuan looked at Muley coldly and even a little angry. Father, it's not easy for brother-in-law to come here. How can you speak like this? The Sea Dragon King was stunned for a moment. He looked at Hai Dachuan and said reproachfully, Presumptuous. Hai Dachuan stared at the Sea Dragon King cold and growled, Do I need you to teach me how to speak like this? The Sea Dragon King was stunned and had a blank face. He did not know why Hai Dachuan suddenly got angry. The expressions of the others changed as well. They felt that Hai Dachuan's reaction was a little strange. Chapter 2875. Zhang Kuang Mulianetan looked at Muley and knew that the latter was here to provoke him. If it was really his son-in-law greeting his father-in-law, how could he have such an attitude? Muley had not entered the island, and he had already made such a big commotion. This was clearly a show of strength to deter others. Moreover, Muley was greeting Hai Dachuan while he was still in the air. It was completely the attitude of a superior. If this was not provocation, what was? If Muley was not satisfied with his marriage with Sea Dragon Island, he could have just asked to cancel it. Why did he have to provoke him in such a way? Moreover, Hai Dachuan's attitude towards Muley was very strange. It was obvious that he did not want to see Muley's arrival. Nietian guessed that there should be some conflict between Hai Dachuan and Muley, or between Sea Dragon Island and Thunder Island. Recalling that Hai Dachuan and the others were attacked by the giant-toothed octopus and black poison marlin not long ago, Nietian naturally linked this matter to Muley. Father-in-law, there's no need to be so angry. Muley's voice sounded again from the sky. I said, I'm not your father-in-law. Hai Dachuan's face turned cold as he said solemnly. Hai Dachuan looked rough, but he was definitely not a fool. In that sea area, there were so many giant-toothed octopus kings giant-toothed octopus emperors, and black poison marlins. So many terrifying sea beasts appeared at the same time and cooperated seamlessly with each other. Even a 3-year-old child would not believe that there was no one controlling these sea beasts. Haidachuan suspected that the culprit of the attack he suffered was his future son-in-law, Mulei. Everyone in Nine Dragons 100 Islands knew that Mulei and Haidachuan's daughter, Hai Meixiang, had an engagement. Originally, Thunder Island and Sea Dragon Island could form an alliance because of the engagement. However, something happened half a month ago that infuriated Haidachuan. Half a month ago, Thunder Island Lord invited Haidachuan to Thunder Island to discuss the engagement between Mulei and Hai Meixiang. But Thunder Island Lord proposed that after Mulei and Hai Meixiang got married, Haidachuan would take the initiative to give the position of Sea Dragon Island Lord to Mulei. It was this matter that made Haidachuan see through the true colors of Thunder Island's Mu family. What marriage alliance? So it was all for the sake of Sea Dragon Island. The Thunderclap Island and the Sea Dragon Island were not far from each other, and both belonged to the Nine Dragons 100 Islands. Originally, the strength of the Thunder Shocking Island was similar to the Sea Dragon Island. However, the Thunder Shocking Island produced Mulei. His martial doubt talent was terrifying, and he was listed as one of the top 10 geniuses of the Nine Dragons 100 Islands. In this way, Thunderclap Island's ambition grew, and they wanted to annex the surrounding islands. The first target of Thunderclap Island was Sea Dragon Island. Unfortunately, Haidachuan did not back down. Not only did he reject the Thunder Island Master's suggestion, but he also fell out with the latter. Thunderclap Island Lord even threatened Haidachuan. He would definitely make Haidachuan pay the price. Haidachuan had originally thought that Thunder Island would break off the engagement with Mulei and use this as an excuse to humiliate Sea Dragon Island. However, he did not expect the Thunderclap Island Lord to be so ruthless and want to kill him directly. The moment he was ambushed, the wood thunder appeared. Could this be a coincidence? Mulei's appearance at this time was clearly to see if he, Haidachuan, was still alive or not. Understanding this point, how could Haidachuan not be angry? Mulei's eyes narrowed slightly in the sky, and he said, "Since Sea Dragon Island Lord doesn't recognize me as his son-in-law, then I, Mulei, am not that kind of shameless person. My engagement with Hai Meixiang is called off from here on." When his voice fell, everyone's eyes trembled and they were stunned on the spot, unable to react for a long time. Who would have thought that Mulei actually wanted to break off the engagement? Young Master Mulei is actually here to break off the engagement. The Nine Dragons 100 Islands all know about his engagement with Miss Hai Meixiang. Isn't he slapping our Sea Dragon Island's face by coming to break off the engagement? Aren't young Master Mulei and Miss Hai Meixiang about to get married? Why would they suddenly break off the engagement? Young Master Mulei is already one of the top 10 geniuses of the Nine Dragons 100 Islands. It can't be that he despises Miss Hai Meixiang, right? Lord Island Lord is too impulsive. Young Master Mulei greeted him nicely. Why is he so angry? Everyone came back to their senses and discussed one after another. Their expressions were all very ugly. Originally, if Hai Meixiang and Mulei were to marry, the Sea Dragon Island would also benefit from it. But now that Mulei had come to break off the engagement, the Sea Dragon Island would undoubtedly become the laughingstock of the Nine Dragons 100 Islands. At this time, the crowd looked at Haidachuan with puzzled eyes. If you want to forget about it, then forget about it. Your Thunder Island has gone too far. Haidachuan, am not a soft persimmon that anyone can bully. Haidachuan was completely enraged. With a roar, his body could not stop trembling. The wound on his chest was torn open and blood dyed half of his body red. He was hit by the black poison marlin and also by the giant-toothed octopus emperor. Although the poison in his body was forcefully forced out by Nie Tian, it would still take a long time for his martial body to completely recover. Lord Island Lord. When everyone saw this scene, they all cried out in panic. Who would have thought that things would turn out like this in an instant? Lord Sea Dragon Island Lord, so you were seriously injured. When Mulei saw that half of Haidachuan's body was dyed red with blood, he could not help but smile looking at your injuries. It should have been caused by the black poison marlin. It's really tragic. Muley puffed. When Haidachuan heard Muley's words, his face suddenly darkened. He let out a low roar, but it affected his wound, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Ha 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 ha! Muley laughed cold and said arrogantly, "See, Dragon Island Lord, I don't think you can make it." A dignified island lord actually died at the hands of a black poison marlin. How pitiful! Muley, you bastard! How did our island lord offend you? How dare you treat him so viciously? Someone could not help but roar and scold. Humph! Muley sneered and took a step forward. A black thunderbolt appeared under his feet and whizzed out, striking towards the person who was cursing. Boom! Wherever the black thunderbolt landed, it immediately turned into ashes. Muley was extremely violent. He actually killed someone directly. Bastard! Everyone gritted their teeth. Their expressions were incomparably furious, and they were all eager to give it a try. They were all from Sea Dragon Island. Muley had already bullied them at their doorstep and even killed them in front of so many people. How could they tolerate this? A bunch of scum. I want to kill your people from Sea Dragon Island. What do you do to me? Muley was extremely arrogant. He glanced at everyone on the island and did not take them seriously at all. All of you don't move. At this moment, Haidachuan let out a low roar, causing everyone who was eager to give a try to stop. Island Lord. Everyone looked at Haidachuan in anger. You are no match for him, Haidachuan said in a deep voice. His face was so gloomy that it looked like it was bleeding. Of course, he wanted to kill Muley. However, he knew that in the entire Sea Dragon Island, apart from him, the Island Lord, no one was a match for Muley. If he attacked now, there would only be more casualties. Muley, you bastard, I'll fight it out with you. However, at this moment, a roar was heard. Then, a voice rose to the sky and blasted towards Muley. Chapter 2876. Tyrannical Suppressionation saw that the figure that suddenly rushed out was actually the Sea Dragon King and could not help but stare. Dragon King, young Island Master, Haidachuan and the people of Sea Dragon Island reacted and shouted at the same time. Their faces changed. Speaking of which, the Sea Dragon King was also a demon-level genius. However, he was after all still young and only had the cultivation of a pinnacle paramount god. He did not stand a chance against Muley, who had the strength of a level 1 half-sage. Boom! In midair, the Sea Dragon King struck out with his palm, and a huge palm shadow appeared. It roared and pressed towards Muley. Courting death. Muley laughed in disdain and said coldly in the face of the Sea Dragon King's palm attack. He then moved his palm, and a black thunderbolt appeared and spread in the sky. It actually formed a huge thunderbolt net and enveloped the Sea Dragon King. The moment the palm shadow came into contact with the lightning net, it was blasted into smithereens. Not good. The Sea Dragon King felt the space around him tighten and immediately realized that something was wrong. He screamed and wanted to retreat, but it was too late. The thunderbolt net covered the sky and the earth and pressed towards him majestically. There was no way for him to retreat. At this moment, Muley's eyes were ruthless and determined. It was obvious that he was determined to kill. If the thunderbolt net fell, the Sea Dragon King would definitely die. Haidachuan and the rest were stunned and were in despair. Roar. However, at this moment of life and death, a shocking dragon roar suddenly came from the sky. Immediately, a red dragon appeared and raised its claws in the sky. It clawed down, and the thunderbolt net was actually smashed into pieces. The Sea Dragon King immediately felt a strong suction force appearing and sucking him up. When he stabilized his body, there was a figure standing beside him. It was Nyetian. Brother Nyetian. The Sea Dragon King broke out in cold sweat and looked at Nyetian in shock. His face was pale. Step back. Nyetian smiled faintly and asked the Sea Dragon King to step back. The Sea Dragon King nodded and returned to Haidachuan's side. When everyone saw that the Sea Dragon King was fine, they could finally relax. Immediately, everyone's eyes focused on Nyetian. Many people who didn't know him began to discuss. Who is this guy? Why haven't I seen him before? He seems to be a friend of the island lord and has just arrived on the island. I really didn't expect this guy to be so strong, even though he looks so sloppy. Was that the dragon energy he used just now? That crimson dragon looks so real. Moreover, this person's strength is actually at the second step of the half-saint realm. He's too strong. He is an outsider, so his strength will be suppressed by the bitter sea. I'm afraid he may not be Mulay's match. As everyone discussed, the way they looked at Nyetian kept changing. High up in the sky, Mulay's eyes were suffused with a chilly killing intent as he stared fixedly at Nyetian. Humph! Suddenly, Mulay sneered and said, "It seems that the island lord has found a helper. However, your helper is only at the second step of the half-saint realm. Isn't that too weak?" Nyetian smiled faintly and said, "Whether I'm weak or strong is not up to you to decide. I'll give you a chance to leave. Scram now." Mulay was stunned for a moment. Then he sneered and said, "Brat, you are just a piece of trash at the second step of the half-saint realm. Why do you have to talk to me like this? You are an outsider. How can you fight with me at the edge of the bitter sea? You can give it a try," Nyetian said with a faint smile that was filled with extreme disdain. Mulay was not considered weak, but he was not enough to enter Nyetian's eyes. It was not an exaggeration to say that as long as Nyetian wanted to, he could easily kill Mulay. Arrogant. Mulay's face darkened. He was obviously infuriated. With a low roar, terrible black thunderbolts surged from his body and bombarded the space. It was terrifying and extremely violent. "Is that all?" Nyetian smiled faintly, but the contempt in his eyes was even more intense. "You're courting death." Mulay's eyes darkened and he roared like thunder. He stood on hundreds of feet of thunderbolts, and dark clouds rolled around his body like a demon. Just now, Nyetian easily broke his thunderbolt net. Therefore, he did not dare to be careless and went all out from the start. The crowd below felt Mulay's thunderbolt momentum, and their expressions changed. They were shocked. They knew that Mulay was terrifying, but they did not expect him to be this terrifying. Mulay is so strong. He is indeed one of the top 10 geniuses of the 9 Dragons 100 Islands. He is indeed Tai Chingfeng's personal disciple. That silver-haired martial artist is in danger. Mulay's aura is so strong. How can he block it? I hope that silver-haired martial artist does not die a horrible death. The crowd had personally experienced Mulay's strength, and they all thought that Nyetian could not be Mulay's opponent. However, before the crowd could finish speaking, a strange scene happened. Puff! In the void, a sword shadow whizzed past. It was extremely fast and landed directly on Mulay's body. The black thunderbolts and dark clouds around him were completely shattered. Bang! Following a muffled sound, Mulay's figure retreated hundreds of meters. After he stabilized himself, his face was pale and there was blood at the corner of his mouth. The shocking scene caused the crowd to fall into a dead silence. Everyone's eyes were blank in an instant. The crowd did not see when Nyetian attacked. The sword intent was too fast, and they could not see it clearly. Even Haida Chuan, who was the strongest among them, was completely stunned. Just now, he already knew how terrifying Nyetian was. However, he did not expect him to be this terrifying. Originally, he thought that Nyetian only had a 50% chance of winning against Mulay. However, the scene before him made him understand that Nyetian had completely crushed Mulay. However, Nyetian was clearly only a second-rank half-sage. Could his strength not be suppressed by the sea of bitterness? Haida Chuan did not know that it was not because Nyetian was not suppressed by the sea of bitterness. It was because his strength was much stronger than other martial artists of the same level. Therefore, the sea of bitterness suppression on him was not obvious. In the sky, Nyetian smiled faintly and looked at Mulay. "Now, can you scram?" Mulay's eyes narrowed. He looked at Nyetian with unconcealable fear. He had never expected Nyetian to be so terrifying. However, he had no intention of leaving. Instead, he focused his gaze and revealed a fierce expression. "Master Ma!" Then, he roared with a gloomy face. Roar! Roar! Just as his voice fell, Two sharp cries rang out in the distant sky. The void suddenly shook and the space tightened. Two giant birds over 1,000 meters long appeared. They spread their wings and pressed down on the void. What is that? When the crowd below saw the two giant birds in the sky, they screamed in shock. In the next moment, the two giant birds landed. On one of the giant birds stood an old figure. He was dressed in black and looked very gloomy. Nyetian fixed his gaze on the old man in black, and his face darkened. He felt a familiar aura from the old man in black. It was the aura of the mastermind that he sensed when he was fighting against the large-toothed octopus. Chapter 2877. The Night Heavenly Kill List. When Nyetian heard the black-robed elder call out his name, he couldn't help but be surprised. It was his first time meeting the black-robed elder, but he seemed to be very familiar with him. His eyes were filled with killing intent, as if he wanted to kill him. Humph! The black-robed old man's eyes were filled with killing intent as he stared coldly at Nyetian. A cold smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he said, "Kid named Nya, you're indeed worthy of being on the Night Heavenly Kill List. You do have some skills." The Night Heavenly Kill List? Hearing these words, Nyetian's eyes narrowed, and a confused look appeared on his face. But in the next moment, he reacted and smiled cold. "So you are from the Night Heavenly Kill List." The name Night was no stranger to Nyetian. When he accompanied Jing Yue and Jing Rue to the Xintian Empire, they met the assassins from the Night Heavenly Kill List. And the one who stopped them was one of the 4 elders of the Night Heavenly Kill List, Dugu Kan. Unfortunately, even though Dugu Kan had personally attacked, he had not been able to kill Nyetian and the others. Instead, Nyetian had broken through the barrier and killed over a dozen world spiritists. Nyetian didn't expect to meet the Night Heavenly Kill List again. At the same time, everyone's faces changed. They first looked at the black-robed elder in fear. They didn't expect him to be from the Night Heavenly Kill List. Following this, everyone's gazes focused on Nyetian. Their eyes were filled with even more fear. They had not expected Nyetian to be a cultivator on the Night Sky Killing List. The Night Heavenly Kill List was the scariest assassin organization in the Myriad regions. It was said that only those who weren't killed by the Night Heavenly Kill List were qualified to be on the Night Heavenly Kill List. The Night Heavenly Kill List was divided into 3 levels: the Night Human Kill List, the Night Earth Kill List, and the Night Heavenly Kill List. The Night Heavenly Kill List was the highest-ranking list in the Night Heavenly Kill List. It was rumored that those who could be on the Night Heavenly Kill List were all very terrifying cultivators. Who would have thought that Nyetian, at such a young age with ordinary strength, was actually a martial artist on the Night Heavenly Kill List? Kid, you still don't know, but you're the first person to make Elder Dugu Kan fail. Your name was personally written by Elder Dugu Kan on the Night Sky Killer List. At this moment, the black-robed elder revealed a cold smile and said, "To be able to make Elder Dugu Kan fail, you are truly not simple." When he said this, his pair of eagle-like eyes stared at Nyetian, as if Nyetian was his prey. When Haidachuan saw this, his heart sank. He could clearly feel the murderous intent in the black-robed old man's eyes. It was too terrifying, causing one's heart to palpitate. Oh! However, Nyetian's face was calm, without a trace of fear. Instead, he laughed and said, "In that case, I should feel honored to be on the Night Heavenly Kill List." "Kidnya, you should feel honored indeed." The black-robed elder smiled coldly and said, "You should know that the Night Heavenly Kill List has millions of years of history. However, a martial artist with only a rank 2 half-saint cultivation has actually made it onto the Night Heavenly Kill List. This is absolutely unprecedented. I really want to see what kind of ability a person like you, who can't even kill Elder Dugu Kan, can have." After saying this, the black-robed elder's eyes were filled with murderous intent. He could not wait to tear Nyetian apart alive. In his opinion, Nyetian was a big fat piece of meat. His name was Ma Rongyao, and he was indeed a killer of the night. However, in a place of darkness, he was extremely lowly and was only a human-level killer. Compared to Dugu Kan, Ma Rongyao was just a small fry. Otherwise, he would not have come to the Bitter Sea Horizon to accept the Sea Dragon Island's mission. Ma Rongniao came to the Bitter Sea Horizon to kill Haidachuan. In order to seize the Sea Dragon Island, the Thunder Island Master specially hired a killer of the night. Ma Rongniao was the killer who came to carry out the mission. However, Ma Rongniao did not expect that he would actually meet a person on the night heavenly kill list at the Bitter Sea Horizon. To him, this was a great opportunity. If he could kill Nie Tian, then he could directly be promoted from a human-level killer to a heaven-level killer. This was a great temptation for him. It meant that he would be valued and nurtured by the higher-ups of the Dark Knight. Therefore, killing Haidachuan was now secondary. The most important thing now was to kill Nie Tian. Nie Tian felt Ma Rongniao's murderous intent. He smiled faintly and said, "Even your great elder Dugu couldn't kill me. Do you think a small fry like you can kill me?" Small fry. Hearing these 3 words, Ma Rongniao's eyes instantly turned red and bloodshot. He was extremely angry. In this life, he hated being called a small fry the most. He joined the Dark Knight at a very young age. However, because of his limited talent, he stayed in the position of a human-level killer for more than 100,000 years. Many people who joined the Dark Knight at the same time as him became heaven-level killers. The weaker ones were earth-level killers. He was the only one who was a human-level killer for 10,000 years. He was already tired of being a small fry. Therefore, he wanted to kill Nie Tian and become a higher-level killer. "Brat, you're courting death." Ma Rongniao's eyes flashed coldly. He let out a low roar and immediately moved. He bent his arms and hunched his back like a black bird, rushing towards Nie Tian. Boom! Immediately after, a terrifying black light appeared in the sky. It was like a rolling dark cloud, and it smashed down. The void sank, and the surrounding world became dim and lightless. "Is that all?" The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched. He sneered, and then the long sword in his hand slashed across the sky. Wherever the sword's shadow passed, the sword light bloomed, and the darkness in the sky was directly swept away. Ma Rongniao suddenly felt a terrifying sword in tin appearing, causing his eyes to tremble and his silhouette to rapidly retreat. And at this moment, a pair of astral soul wings appeared behind Nie Tian's back. His silhouette was like lightning, shooting up into the sky and directly slashing down. A gigantic sword shadow slashed towards Ma Rongniao. The sword's shadow was incomparably sharp. Everywhere it passed, it felt as though the void was about to split open. Ma Rongniao felt the danger. His hunched body shrunk as black qi permeated the air around him. Numerous black runes appeared and actually formed a gigantic Xian tortoise. Bang! In the next moment, the sword's shadow fell with a loud rumble, and a domineering aura descended. Ma Rongniao's body sank, and the shadow of the black tortoise could only shatter. His entire body was directly sent flying, and he only managed to stabilize his body after retreating thousands of meters. "Brat, pooh!" He stabilized his body, and his eyes trembled. Just as he wanted to speak, he violently coughed out a mouthful of blood. His face was as pale as a sheet. He had never thought that Nie Tian's strength would be so strong. Nie Tianling coldly laughed. He frowned and said, "A small fry will always be a small fry, unable to withstand a single blow." In fact, Ma Rongniao's strength wasn't considered weak. His cultivation had already reached the 9th level of the half-saint realm. Under normal circumstances, he would be able to block 2 to 3 strikes from Nie Tian. But in the cliff of the Sea of Bitterness, his strength was suppressed while Nie Tian's suppression was relatively lesser. Hence, Nie Tian could easily crush him. Damn it! Ma Rongniao's eyes flickered with coldness as he let out a low roar. After which, he let out a strange sound that seemed to be of a low frequency. Ordinary cultivators wouldn't be able to hear it. Boom! In the next instant, a terrifying tremor could be heard in the sky. Chapter 2878. Can I escape? What is that? The people of the Sea Dragon Island exclaimed as their eyes trembled violently at the sight of the terrifying black cloud pressing down from the sky. Tion's eyes narrowed as he activated his demonic eye, and finally saw clearly that it was not a black cloud in the sky, but a flock of strange-looking blackbirds. Those blackbirds were very small, only the size of an adult's fist, but there were many of them, and when they gathered together, they looked like a huge black cloud. The blackbirds were ugly, looking a little like bats and a little like wasps. Their faces, however, looked a little like a human's. "He's a beastmaster." At that moment, Tion frowned as he stared coldly at Ma Rongyao. Before, when Ma Rongyao ambushed Haidachuan, he did not do it himself, but had instead used the big-toothed octopus and the black poison marlin. And now, he had attracted so many blackbirds. There was no doubt that he was a beastmaster. "Master Ma, hurry up and let those man-faced wasps kill everyone from the Sea Dragon Island." Beside him, Muley was very excited at the sight of the countless black birds and shouted loudly. "So, those small birds were called man-faced wasps." "Shut up." Ma Rongyao glared at Muley and scolded him. He only had Tion in his eyes at the moment, so where would he find the leisure to deal with the people of the Sea Dragon Island? As long as he could kill Tion, the merit would be greater than wiping out 100 Sea Dragon Islanders. Brat, with so many man-faced wasps, even a demi-saint would not be able to stop them. Just wait for your death. Ma Rongyao looked at Tion with an incomparably sharp gaze as he said coldly, "Is that so?" Tion laughed, and his figure immediately moved. Sword will surged around him, forming countless blades of sword will outside his body that were incredibly sharp and murderous. In the next moment, his figure turned into a streak of light as he charged towards the swarm of man-faced wasps. "My friend Tion." Haidachuan's eyes trembled at the sight as he cried out in shock. Of course, he knew that Tion did not want to involve others, so he directly rushed over. "Brat, you're courting death." Ma Rongyao smirked when he saw Tion rushing over. His eyes were filled with malice. These human-faced poisonous wasps were the result of his long period of training. Although the human-faced poison bee was small in size, its body was very strong. Moreover, it was extremely fast and poisonous. As long as Tion was stung by a poisonous wasp, the poison would instantly take effect in his body. Although it wouldn't kill him, it would definitely reduce his strength. As the saying goes, many ants can kill an elephant. No matter how strong Tion was, could he kill all the human-faced bees? Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. At this time, Tion, who was in mid-air, directly drew his sword. Wherever the sword pointed, countless sword shadows filled the air and actually condensed into a sword net in the air, covering the sky and covering the earth, towards the human-faced venomous bees. The sword shadows rolled like raging waves, and the flowing light in the sky was incomparably dazzling. It was very beautiful, but it contained a terrible, murderous intent. Bang, bang, bang. In the next moment, the sword net fell, hitting the human-faced venomous bees, and there was a dense sound of collision in the air. Tion's eyes were like torches. He saw that the human-faced venomous bees that were hit by the sword shadows did not die, but were only sent flying. When he saw this scene, he could not help but narrow his eyes. He did not expect these small human-faced venomous bees to be so strong. Even after his sword intent was dispersed, it was still very powerful, but it actually could not directly kill these poisonous wasps. Soon, the sword shadows that filled the sky dissipated, but it only temporarily stopped the swarm from approaching. Then, the swarm gathered again, connecting into a line in the air like a long snake, and shrouding towards Tion. Buzz! Tion's eyebrows furrowed as a deafening buzzing filled his ears. In the next moment, the swarm of bees rushed over and actually covered his whole body. "Ha ha ha!" Ma Rongyao laughed wildly at the sight, and exclaimed excitedly, "You brat with the surname Nya, you're dead meat." Surrounded by the human-faced venomous bees, even a demi-saint would be instantly gnawed in a bone pulp. Tion. Down below, Shui-Er's clear eyes trembled when she saw this. She murmured worriedly, "Don't worry." The people of the Sea Dragon Island were trembling in horror, and their hearts were in their throats. They knew that if Nietian were to die, the Sea Dragon Island would also meet its end today. Boom! But it was at that moment that a violent sword aura shot up into the sky, its momentum surging and shaking off the swarm of bees. A figure stood in the air like a sword, his silver hair fluttering. It was none other than Nietian. How? How is this possible? Ma Rongyao's eyes trembled, and he was so shocked that even his voice was trembling. He had never imagined that Nietian could actually break through the encirclement of the bees. Humph. Trying to kill me with just a swarm of bees? You're really underestimating me. Nietian stood proudly in the air, his body surging with sword will, and those human-faced venomous bees could not even get close to him. 12 heaven-slaying sword array, activate. In the next moment, his mouth twitched as he let out a low roar. Instantly, the sword will around him spread wildly, and sword runes appeared beneath his feet. 12 terrifying sword shadows shot up into the sky like giant dragons, enveloping all the human-faced venomous bees. This, Ma Rongyao was aghast, and he had an ominous feeling in his heart. Could it be that Nietian was going to kill all those human-faced venomous bees? Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, the huge sword shadows in the sky exploded one after another. Suddenly, the sword will rushed out in all directions, and the power to destroy everything was like a whirlwind that swept away the clouds, surging with killing intent. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the scene before them, and they were extremely shocked. They saw that wherever the waves of sword will passed, blood filled the air. When the sword will dissipated, the space was clean again. Tens of thousands of human-faced venomous bees had been killed. Nietian stood high up in the sky with a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. Below, Ma Rongyao was completely dumbfounded. His face was lifeless, and his expression was even uglier than if he had eaten *T. The tens of thousands of human-faced venomous bees were something that he had spent countless amounts of blood, sweat, and tears to raise. In the blink of an eye, they were all killed by Nietian. Of course, that was not the most important thing. What was more terrifying was that he had witnessed Nietian's shocking combat abilities. He originally wanted to kill Nietian, but now it would be difficult for him to leave alive. Grandmaster Ma, what should we do? On the side, Muley finally reacted. His teeth were chattering, and his face was pale. *CK off. Ma Rongyao growled. Then his silhouette moved, and he wanted to escape. Escape? Do you think you can escape? When Nietian saw this, the corner of his mouth twitched, and his eyes were extremely cold. At a time like this, how could he let Ma Rongyao leave? But Ma Rongyao didn't care about anything else, and he ran for his life. Die! Nietian murmured. His silhouette moved, and his entire body was like a sword. Whoosh! In midair, a sword shadow fell like a shooting star, and blood appeared. Ma Rongyao didn't even have the chance to scream before he died. This killer, who had been a human face killer for hundreds of thousands of years, died a small fry. Chapter 2879. Hundreds of territories and myriad islands. What are you doing? When Muley was stared at by Nietian, his entire body could not help but tremble. His small face was as pale as paper, and it was obvious that he was extremely afraid. At this moment, he was no longer as arrogant as before. Instead, he was filled with terror and fear. After personally witnessing Nietian's shocking battle prowess, his little heart was about to jump out of his chest. He simply didn't dare to imagine that a second-rank half-saint would actually possess such formidable strength. What do you think? Nietian laughed. He took a step forward and arrived in front of Muley. His eyes were strange and sinisterly cold as he stared at the latter. Muley felt a bone-chilling, killing intent. His tongue was stuck in his throat, and he couldn't even speak. His entire body was drenched in cold sweat, as though he was taking a shower, after which his knees softened as he knelt down and begged, "Please, please don't kill me." When the crowd below saw this, their expressions changed completely. Who would have thought that Muley, one of the top 10 geniuses of the 9 Dragons 100 Islands, was actually a coward who knelt on the spot in order to survive. The lofty image of Mu Lei in everyone's eyes instantly fell to the bottom. What bullish asterisk T genius. He's just a useless coward. This kind of trash wants to marry Miss Hai Mei Xiang, and even dares to break off the engagement. What a disgrace. Fortunately, Miss Hai Mei Xiang didn't marry him. Otherwise, our Sea Dragon Island would be disgraced together with him. People discussed with resentment on their faces. Hai Dachuan, on the other hand, had a gloomy expression as he thought to himself, "This Mu Lei is actually a coward. I was really blind back then to actually agree to his marriage with Xiang. Bah, coward." The Sea Dragon King spat and scolded with disdain. At this moment, Mu Lei had already collapsed into a pile of mud. He was shivering and did not even dare to look at Nie Tian. "Beg for mercy?" Nie Tianling laughed and said, "I like to see those arrogant people kneel and beg for mercy, but I won't forgive them. You really want to kill me?" Mu Lei's eyes trembled and his voice carried a sobbing tone. He was actually scared to tears. "What do you think?" Nie Tian smiled faintly and took a step forward. His hand was like an iron claw as it reached out. "My little friend Nie Tian, wait." However, right at this moment, a voice rang out as a figure appeared. It was Hai Dachuan. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he turned around to look at Hai Dachuan. Smiling, he asked, "Island Lord, are you going to kill this guy personally?" "Little friend Nie Tian, in my opinion, you should let him go," Hai Dachuan said with a frown on his face. "Let him go." Nie Tian frowned and said, Island Lord, he just wanted to kill everyone in the Sea Dragon Island. Are you really going to let him go?" "Yes." Hai Dachuan's face was solemn as he nodded helplessly. "Thank you, father-in-law. Thank you, father-in-law." Hearing that Hai Dachuan was actually letting him go, Mu Lei hurriedly kowtowed in thanks. "Get lost." Hai Dachuan growled cold as his eyes were filled with killing intent. Yes. I'll get lost now." Mu Lei nodded and immediately stood up. His body moved as he fled in a panic. Nie Tian looked at Mu Lei with a gloomy expression. He knew that Hai Dachuan must have his reasons for letting Mu Lei go. Hai Dachuan wanted to kill Mu Lei more than Nie Tian. However, he could not do so because there was more than one Thunderclap Island behind Mu Lei. "My little friend Nie Tian, let's go back to the island and talk." Hai Dachuan let out a long sigh as he moved and landed on the island. When Nie Tian returned to the island, he let Cher and Xiaoyu stay in the courtyard that Hai Dachuan had arranged for them. Then, he went to find Hai Dachuan. Sea Dragon Island, Conference Hall. Hai Dachuan sat on the main seat with an ugly expression on his face. He seemed to have aged a few decades, and his aura was weak. On his left and right sat a few elders and middle-aged men. They were all people with some status on Sea Dragon Island. Nie Tian sat at the lowest seat with Sea Dragon King beside him. The atmosphere in the entire hall was heavy and dead silent. Although Nie Tian had just killed the night assassin hired by Thunderclap Island and intimidated Mu Lei. However, Hai Dachuan and the rest knew that Sea Dragon Island was about to end. Thunderclap Island had their eyes on Sea Dragon Island and even hired the night assassin. It was obvious that they were determined to get Sea Dragon Island. Nie Tian managed to protect Sea Dragon Island this time. But what would happen next? Nie Tian was an outsider after all, and he was about to leave Sea Dragon Island. Moreover, even if he did not leave, could he protect Sea Dragon Island with his strength alone? "Father, why did you let Mu Lei go?" At this moment, Sea Dragon King spoke loudly and furiously. He was young after all, and could not see what was going on behind the scenes. "Sit down." Hai Dachuan stared at Sea Dragon King and reprimanded him coldly. "Father." Sea Dragon King looked a little unwilling and wanted to say something more. Nie Tian looked at Sea Dragon King and signaled him to stop talking. "Sigh." The Sea Dragon King sighed and sat down. "My friend Nie Tian, you must be wondering why I let Mu Lei go, right?" At this moment, Hai Dachuan looked at Nie Tian and forced a smile on his face. "Island Lord, if you have anything to say, please say it." Nie Tian did not want to beat around the bush and said straightforwardly, "As long as I can help, I will definitely help." How could he not see that Hai Dachuan obviously had a favor to ask of him by asking him to come to the conference hall. My friend Tian, since you said so, I will not stand on ceremony. Hai Dachuan's eyes darkened and said, the reason why I let Mu Lei go is not because he is the young island lord of Thunderclap Island, but because of his teacher, Tai Chungfeng. Tai Chungfeng? Tian's eyes narrowed and asked, who is that? Hai Dachuan sighed and said, my friend Tian, you have just arrived at the shore of Bitter Sea, and there are many things you do not understand. Our Bitter Sea is known as the 100 Territories and 10,000 Islands. The entire shore of Bitter Sea is divided into more than 100 sea regions. Each sea region has at least a few dozen islands and at most a few hundred islands. Every sea region has a sea lord who controls all the islands in the sea region. The sea region where Sea Dragon Island and Thunderclap Island are located is the Nine Dragons Sea region, and the sea lord of the Nine Dragons Sea region is Lord Tai Chungfeng. Mu Lei is Lord Tai Chungfeng's disciple. It is because of Mu Lei's identity that I dare not let you kill him. With that, Hai Dachuan sighed deeply and his eyes trembled slightly, as though he was hiding something that he did not say. I see. Tian listened and smiled faintly. He looked at Hai Dachuan and asked, there are more than 100 sea regions in the shore of Bitter Sea. Are there any connections between each sea region? If there is a conflict between the sea regions, who will take care of it? My friend Tian, there are more than 100 sea lords in the shore of Bitter Sea. However, the authority of these sea lords is limited to the sea region they are in. No sea lord dares to interfere with the matters of other sea regions. Hai Dachuan said in a deep voice. Why? Tian was stunned for a moment and continued to ask. More than 100 sea regions were very close to each other. It was impossible for there to be no conflicts. Chapter 2880. A Strange Thing, Cloud Buddha, Sure Family. Tian's eyes narrowed when he heard these 4 words. He came to the horizon of the Sea of Bitterness to find the Cloud Buddha, Sure Clan. But he didn't expect that the Cloud Buddha, Sure Clan, actually controlled the entire shore of the Sea of Suffering. No wonder Hai Dachuan was so nervous when he said that he wanted to find Manjusaka. It turned out that the Cloud Buddha, Sure Clan, that had gone into seclusion was still so powerful. Hai Dachuan nodded and said, before the Cloud Buddha, Shurja, came to the shore of the Sea of Bitterness, the entire shore of the Sea of Bitterness was in constant chaos. Battles would break out between the various sea islands. But after the Cloud Buddha, Sure Clan arrived, it only took them a few years to unify the Sea of Bitterness horizon. Furthermore, they have divided the sea regions and clearly stated that the various sea regions are not allowed to start a war with each other. It is precisely because of this that the Sea of Misery horizon enjoys its current peace. However, it has been a long time since anyone from the Cloud Buddha clan has appeared. Moreover, for the past several tens of thousands of years, there have been occasional skirmishes between the various seas, but no one from the Cloud Buddha sect has ever come to stop them. In this way, there are many sea regions that are ready to make trouble. That's why the Sea of Misery horizon isn't very peaceful right now. If the people of the Cloud Buddha clan still don't show up, I'm afraid that the Sea of Bitterness cliff will fall into chaos again. Tian frowned as he listened, his eyes trembling slightly. It seemed that the arrival of the Cloud Buddha sect to the Bitter Sea horizon had brought benefits to the people there. It was just that he had no idea why no one from the Cloud Buddha Sure clan had appeared for tens of thousands of years. Speaking of which, the Cloud Buddha Sure clan hadn't shown their faces for tens of thousands of years, yet they were still able to intimidate over 100 sea regions of the Sea of Bitterness. This was enough to show how powerful the Cloud Buddha Sure clan was. Lord Island Lord, the people of the Cloud Buddha Sure clan haven't shown themselves. Has no Sea Lord taken the initiative to look for them? Tian pondered for a moment and voiced out his doubts. Logically speaking, it was the existence of the Cloud Buddha Sure clan that ensured peace in the Sea of Misery horizon. Those Sea Lords who suffered losses from minor conflicts should go to the Cloud Buddha Sure clan to uphold justice for them. Of course they want to, but who dares? Hai Dachuan shook his head with a bitter smile and said, The Cloud Buddha Shurja lives in the Cloud Buddha Peak, and the sea within 10,000 miles of the Cloud Buddha Peak is the Cloud Buddha Sea region. Ever since the day the Cloud Buddha Shurja arrived, the Cloud Buddha Sea region has been the forbidden land of the Sea of Bitterness. Apart from the people of the Cloudy Buddha Shur clan, no one else is allowed to take half a step near the Cloudy Buddha Sea. In the past, there was a sea master that disregarded orders and charged into the Cloud Buddha Sea region. Not only was that sea master killed, even the sea he resided in was completely destroyed by the Cloud Buddha Shur family. As he spoke of this matter, Haida Chuan couldn't help but reveal a look of shock and fear. There were tens of millions of people in this sea region, yet they were all annihilated by the Cloud Buddha Shur family. How tragic was that? The Cloud Buddha Shur clan is so ruthless. Tian's eyes narrowed and his face darkened, because a sea lord barged into the Cloud Buddha Sea region and actually destroyed a sea region. This kind of method was indeed too ruthless. Could there be something shameful hidden in the Cloud Buddha Sea region? Ever since that incident, no one has dared to take half a step into the Cloud Buddha Sea region. Haida Chuan sighed helplessly and said, "Therefore, even if the people of the Cloud Buddha Shur family don't show themselves, no one dares to look for them." Tian nodded, but he couldn't help but furrow his brows as he thought to himself, "It seems like finding Manjusaka is more difficult than I thought." After hearing Haida Chuan's words, he had a rough understanding of the entire coast of the Bitter Sea. "Island Master, you didn't let Muley go because you were afraid of the Thunderclap Island, but his master, Tai Chingfeng." Following this, Tian smiled and looked at Haida Chuan. "Are you suspecting that the Thunderclap Island has obtained Tai Chingfeng's permission to annex the Ocean Dragon Island?" Haida Chuan's eyes flickered when he heard Tian's words. He was stunned for a few seconds before he finally nodded his head. He had such a suspicion in his heart, but he didn't dare to voice it out. Although the Sea Lord of the Edge of the Bitter Sea controlled all the islands in his sea domain, he didn't have absolute authority over every single island. At the end of the day, the true ruler of each island was still the island master. Under normal circumstances, as long as there were no major conflicts in the sea, the people of the Cloud Buddha sect would not show themselves. The Thunderclap Island and the Sea Dragon Island were close to each other. The two islands had always been very peaceful. However, Thunderclap Island suddenly wanted to annex Sea Dragon Island, which was very strange. Haida Chuan felt that without Tai Chingfeng's permission, Thunderclap Island Master would never dare to set his sights on Sea Dragon Island. Therefore, the one who truly wanted the Sea Dragon Island was not the Thunder Island Lord, but the Lord of the Nine Dragons Sea, Tai Chingfeng. If that was really the case, then Haida Chuan would have no chance to resist. Even if Tian went all out to help, it was also impossible to block Tai Chingfeng. So that's how it is. Tian frowned. He understood a lot more now. It seemed like the Nine Dragons Sea domain was more complicated than he had imagined. He was very puzzled. Why would Sea Lord want an island under his own sea? Lord Island Lord, has anything strange happened on Sea Dragon Island recently? Tian's eyes narrowed as he looked at Haida Chuan and asked. Something strange, Haida Chuan muttered and began to ponder. After a while, he shook his head. He really did not remember anything strange happening on Sea Dragon Island. Tian frowned and looked at the others. The others also shook their heads. "Father." At this moment, the Sea Dragon King, who had been holding back his words, suddenly said, "Doesn't our Sea Dragon Island have a volcano that leads to the bottom of the Bitter Sea?" Some time ago, that volcano suddenly erupted. Isn't that strange? Haida Chuan was stunned for a moment. He frowned and said, "That volcano has been silent for hundreds of thousands of years. Some time ago, it did erupt and spewed out a lot of weird volcanic magma. Now that I think about it, it is a little strange. A volcano that leads to the bottom of the Bitter Sea." Tian's eyes darkened. He pondered and then said, "Lord Island Lord, can I go take a look at this volcano?" "Of course." Haida Chuan was stunned for a moment. He stood up and said, "Tian, my little friend, I'll bring you there now." Tian nodded and rose to his feet, leaving the meeting hall. Under Haida Chuan's lead, Nietion soon came to a volcano in the central area of Sea Dragon Island. So this volcano is so big. Nietion looked at the volcano in front of him and couldn't help but exclaim with a smile. Sea Dragon Island was not very big. He did not expect that there would be such a huge volcano on the island. Nietion, my little friend, please. Haidachuan forced a smile and was ready to bring Nietion to take a look at the crater of the volcano. Boom! However, at this moment, a majestic strength suddenly appeared in the sky above Sea Dragon Island. Even the void sank because of it. Immediately, a black figure appeared and stood in the sky. He opened his mouth and said with a thunderous voice, Junior Tai Long Ding is here to see Lord Sea Dragon Island. Chapter 2881. Is he being forced? Island Lord, who is this? Nietion could not help but ask after seeing Haidachuan's panic. His name is Tai Long Ding, the son of Tai Chungfeng. Haidachuan lowered his voice and said with an ugly expression, Why is Tai Long Ding here? Sea Dragon King looked at Tai Long Ding angrily. Muley just left, and this Tai Long Ding is here again. I'm afraid he is not here. One of the people from Sea Dragon Island said worriedly, Island Lord, why don't we hide first and say that you are not on the island? Another person looked at Haidachuan and said softly, Tai Long Ding is such a powerful person. Can I hide if he wants to find me? Haidachuan smiled bitterly and said, If it's a blessing, it's not a curse. If it's a curse, I can't avoid it. I'd better see him. Island Lord, Junior Tai Long Ding requests an audience. At this moment, Tai Long Ding's voice was heard again. It was powerful and spread throughout the entire Sea Dragon Island. Tai Long Ding, don't shout anymore. I'm here. Haidachuan replied loudly and leaped into the air. Tai Long Ding's eyes narrowed when he saw Haidachuan. He took a step forward and bowed politely. Junior Tai Long Ding greets, Island Lord. Haidachuan smiled and said, Tai Long Ding, what's the matter? Just say it. Tai Long Ding's name was famous throughout the entire Nine Dragon Sea. It was not only because he was the son of Tai Chingfeng, but also because he was the #1 genius of the 9 Dragon 100 Islands. He was so young and already had the cultivation of a 5th stage half-sage. More importantly, Tai Long Ding was not only talented in martial arts, but he was also very shrewd and cunning. It was rumored that his methods were even more vicious than his father, Tai Chungfeng. Tai Long Ding was famous for being a smiling tiger. He would say one thing on the surface and another on the back. He came to see Haidachuan and seemed to be polite, but he did not put Haidachuan in his eyes at all. Island Lord Haidachuan is indeed straightforward. Tai Long Ding laughed loudly and said, Junior came to see Dragon Island under my father's order. Region Lord. Hearing Tai Long Ding's words, Haidachuan's eyes couldn't help but narrow. Unable to conceal the panic in his eyes, he asked, What does the domain Lord want from me? Ha! Tai Long Ding laughed heartily and said, Don't be nervous, Island Lord Hai Long. It's a good thing that my father is looking for you. My father heard that you and Thunderclap Island Lord had some conflicts recently, and that junior brother Mu Lei had done something he shouldn't have. After my father heard about it, he was very angry and severely reprimanded junior brother Mu Lei. Furthermore, he specifically asked me to come to Sea Dragon Island and ask Island Lord Sea Dragon to come to 9 Dragons Island. My father is willing to be a middleman to mediate the conflict between Sea Dragon Island and Thunder Island. After all, we're all in the same sea region. We really shouldn't. I'm sorry, I'm injured, so I can't go. Without waiting for Tai Long Ding to finish, Haidachuan directly said, I appreciate Domain Lord's good intentions. If Thunderclap Island Lord drops the matter just like this, I, Haidachuan, guarantee that I will absolutely not find trouble with Thunderclap Island. Tai Long Ding looked at Haidachuan and abruptly laughed. Island Lord Sea Dragon, I've personally come to invite you. If you don't go, I won't be able to complete my mission. Tai Long Ding, I've said it very clearly. As long as Thunderclap Island Lord lets go of the matter between Sea Dragon Island and Thunderclap Island, there will be no more conflicts. Haidachuan's face was gloomy and cold. Oh, Tai Long Ding laughed and said, In that case, Island Lord Sea Dragon is not giving my father any face. Tai Long Ding, as you can see, I'm indeed injured and can't go. Please forgive me, Domain Lord. Hai Dachuan said in a deep voice. He had already felt the threat in Tai Long Ding's tone. However, he definitely couldn't go to Nine Dragons Island. He had a hunch that if he went this time, he might not have the chance to return to Sea Dragon Island. Island Lord Sea Dragon, if you're injured, I can carry you there. Tai Long Ding sneered and took a step forward. A terrifying aura gushed out from his body, and he said, If you still don't go, you'll be looking down on me, Tai Long Ding. Boom! As his voice fell, Tai Long Ding's aura was like a mountain, surging into space. Hai Dachuan felt Tai Long Ding's aura and couldn't help but be shocked. Both he and Tai Long Ding had the strength of a 5th stage half-sage. However, even if he was in his peak state, his aura couldn't compare to Tai Long Ding's. If Tai Long Ding directly attacked, he could almost kill him in one move. Seems like I can't escape this time. Hai Dachuan's eyes were gloomy, and he sighed in his heart. Tai Long Ding, my father doesn't want to go. What right do you have to force him to go? At this moment, a figure appeared behind Hai Dachuan and shouted angrily. Tai Long Ding's lips curled up. He looked over and saw that it was Sea Dragon King. He couldn't help but smile and said, So it's brother Sea Dragon King. I haven't seen you for so many years, and you've grown so big. Who's your brother? Don't try to get close to me. Sea Dragon King replied coldly and was very angry. Tai Long Ding curled his lips and said, Sea Dragon King, it's not right for you to say that. I was discussing with your father. How could I force him? Ask your father yourself. Did I force him? Tai Long Ding, you're shameless. Sea Dragon King's eyes darkened as he scolded. Dragon King, step down. Hai Dachuan's face darkened as he stared at Sea Dragon King fiercely. Sea Dragon King was unwilling, but he still retreated to one side. Tai Long Ding, I'll go with you. Hai Dachuan said solemnly. The light in his eyes dimmed, as if he had lost all his faith. Once he left, he was destined not to come back. He was only thinking about whether he could protect the lives of everyone in Sea Dragon Island. At this moment, he even regretted not agreeing with Thunder Island Lord and giving the position of Sea Dragon Island Lord to Mu Lei. If that was the case, he wouldn't be in such an embarrassing situation today. Sea Dragon Island Lord is a smart man. I admire you. Tai Long Ding smiled faintly, but his eyes were shining with a sinister light. Let's go. Hai Dachuan said solemnly as he prepared to leave with Tai Long Ding. Wait. But at this moment, two voices sounded almost at the same time. One came from behind and the other from in front. Hai Dachuan's eyes narrowed. He first looked at Tai Long Ding, then turned around and saw Nie Tian. The voices just now were from Tai Long Ding and Nie Tian. Nie Tian, my friend, you. Hai Dachuan looked at Nie Tian and didn't know what to say. Nie Tian smiled faintly and came to Hai Dachuan's side. His eyes stared straight at Tai Long Ding. So Nie Tian, you injured junior brother Mu Lei. My father also wants to invite you to Nine Dragons Island. Tai Long Ding also looked at Nie Tian and smiled faintly. He shouted wait just now because this time, not only did he want to invite Hai Dachuan, he also wanted to invite Nie Tian. And Nie Tian shouted wait because he couldn't just watch Tai Long Ding take Hai Dachuan away. Chapter 2882. Furious Tai Long Ding up in the sky, Nie Tian said indifferently. He looked at Tai Long Ding calmly, but his eyes were filled with disdain. Upon hearing Nie Tian's words, Hai Dachuan couldn't help but go blank for a moment. He didn't expect that Iron Dragon Ding would not only invite him to the Sea Dragon Island, but also invite Nie Tian. He did not expect that Nie Tian's response would be so overbearing. Not going, Tai Long Ding looked at Nie Tian and asked. His eyes turned gloomy and cold. Nie Tian, do you know who Mu Lei is? The son of the Thunderclap Island Lord, the Lord of the Nine Dragons Sea, Tai Chungfeng. You're Tai Long Ding's junior, right? Nie Tian laughed as he stated Mu Lei's identity in an extremely accurate manner. The cold disdain in his calm eyes was already obvious. It seems that you know Mu Lei's identity very well. Tai Long Ding was slightly stunned. He did not expect Nie Tian to be so overbearing. But then he laughed and said, Then you should know that it was my father's idea to invite you to the Nine Dragons Island. You had to give my father an explanation for injuring Mu Lei. An explanation? And yet Tianling smiled and said, letting Mu Lei go back alive is the best explanation I can give. Brat, you. Tai Long Deng's eyes turned cold. He felt a stuffy fire in his chest that he could neither swallow nor spit out. He, Tai Long Deng, had never dared to show such an attitude in front of him in the Nine Dragon Sea. What about me? The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched. His eyes were filled with disdain as he said, let me give you a piece of advice. You'd better scram before I get angry. Otherwise, I can guarantee that you'll end up 100 times worse than Mu Lei. You're courting death. At this moment, Tai Long Deng couldn't bear it any longer. With a low roar, he took a step forward. The violent energy within his body surged out like a raging tsunami, transforming into a terrifying black claw that slashed towards Nie Tian. In an instant, the void suddenly sank, as if it was about to be torn apart. It had to be said that Tai Long Deng was indeed a rare martial arts genius. His battle prowess was extremely strong. Even though he was only a 5th-rank half-saint, his combat strength was absolutely comparable to a 7th-rank half-saint or even stronger. Unfortunately, the person he was facing was Nie Tian, a super monstrous genius. Boom! Nie Tian stood high up in the sky and didn't even bother to look at him. The starlight heaven slash appeared in his hand, and he directly stabbed it forward. Instantly, the sword image was as violent as a dragon, exploding out. Boom! Then, in the air, 2 violent forces clashed against each other, causing the entire space to tremble. A boundless amount of energy spread out in all directions. Tai Long Deng felt the tremendous energy engulfing him. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he took several steps back. On the other hand, Nie Tian was like an unmoving mountain, standing proudly. Tai Long Deng steadied his body and looked at Nie Tian again, his expression clearly changing. He never imagined that Nie Tian's battle prowess would be so terrifying. He was a 5th-rank half-saint, while Nie Tian was just a 2nd-rank half-saint. The strangest thing was that Nie Tian's strength did not seem to be suppressed at all in this sea of misery horizon. How is that possible? The crowd below looked up at the scene in the sky, their eyes trembling violently. Lord Nie Tian is too powerful. Is he still a normal martial artist? Tai Long Deng is the #1 genius of the 9 Dragons 100 Islands and a dignified 5th-rank half-saint. But he can't even beat Lord Nie Tian. Am I really not mistaken? I think that Lord Nie Tian's battle prowess is already stronger than a demi-saint. Nonsense. Lord Nie Tian is definitely stronger than a demi-saint. I saw that he didn't even use 1/10 of his strength when he repelled Tai Long Deng. The crowd discussed among themselves, not bothering to hide their admiration for Nie Tian at all. It was as if the latter was no longer a human, but a true god. Tai Long Deng's face turned ashen as he listened to the crowd's words. To think that he, the dignified #1 genius of the 9 Dragons 100 Islands, could not even beat a foreign 2nd-rank half-saint. That was simply a disgrace. Tai Long Deng, I'll give you one more chance. Scram! At that moment, Nie Tian spoke. His voice was calm, but the domineering aura of his body had already been fully revealed. Nie Tian, you're too arrogant. Tai Long Deng was completely enraged. With a roar, the wild energy around his body surged and became extremely frightening. Boom! Waves of wild energy crashed into the air like sharp blades, as if they could cut through the void at any moment. Following that, the boundless power condensed into an enormous black beast outside of Tai Long Deng's body. It looked a little like a dragon, but also a little like a pig. So strong. The crowd's eyes trembled as they exclaimed. Obviously, they did not expect Tai Long Deng to be able to release such a frightening aura. Father, will Brother Nie Tian be all right? The Sea Dragon King looked at Hai Da Chuan and asked worriedly. Yes. Hai Da Chuan nodded his head in agreement. However, his eyes flickered. He was not sure if Nie Tian was Tai Long Deng's opponent. After all, Tai Long Deng was the #1 genius of the 9 Dragons 100 Islands. Moreover, the martial technique he was using now was most likely a secret technique of the Tai family. According to the rumors, the Tai family of the Nine Dragons 100 Islands had 3 great secret techniques. The reason why the Tai family was able to rule the Nine Dragon Sea region was because of these 3 secret techniques. It seems to be the power of a bloodline, but it is perfectly compatible with a martial skill. Interesting. Nie Tian looked at Tai Long Deng. The corners of his mouth curled into a smile, and he spoke with a calm expression. Die for me. Tai Long Deng executed the secret technique of the Tai family. When he saw that not only did Nie Tian not feel the slightest bit of fear, but he was even smiling, he felt extremely humiliated. This caused him to be even more enraged. With a loud roar, his silhouette flickered as he lunged towards Nie Tian. Boom! At the instant his silhouette landed, the entire space trembled. At the same time, a terrifying force erupted forth, transforming into a boundless pressure that pressed down on Nie Tian. Nie Tian's lips twitched, but his countenance did not change. One of his astral souls appeared behind his back, and like a beam of light, he retreated 1,000 meters to the side. Just by relying on his nimble movements, he managed to evade Tai Long Deng's attack. Damn it! Tai Long Deng's attack missed. He was instantly enraged. With a roar, he continued to attack, but all of his attacks were dodged by Nie Tian. After activating the secret technique, the aura around him increased by several folds, but his speed decreased by a lot. Smelly brat, if you are a man, don't dodge. Let's fight head-on. Tai Long Deng roared like a wild beast in a cage, howling madly. Tai Long Deng, this idiot. He can't even touch Big Brother Nie Tian's shadow, and he still wants Big Brother Nie Tian to fight head-on with him. What a fool. The Sea Dragon King, who was at the side, laughed loudly when he saw this scene. Scram! Tai Long Deng's expression darkened. He stared at the Sea Dragon King and roared. He actually wanted to attack the latter. Chapter 2883. Thunder, Island Lord. You really want to fight me head-on? Tai Long Deng's eyes blazed with killing intent when he heard Nie Tian's words. The Tai family's secret technique he was using was called the Iron Dragon Robe. Once he used it, his aura would multiply. Therefore, his current battle strength was already terrifying. He wouldn't be afraid, even if he faced a 9th stage half-saint head-on. But while the Iron Dragon Robe was powerful, it had a fatal weakness. It would greatly reduce a cultivator's speed. Tai Long Deng thought that Nie Tian didn't dare to face him head-on because he knew he was no match for him and could only dodge. Now that Nie Tian wanted to fight him head-on, it was exactly what he wanted. He was confident that he could kill Nie Tian in one move in a head-on battle. Are you excited? Nie Tian chuckled, his indifferent voice filled with disdain. Brat, the Tai family's Iron Dragon Robe is not something you can imagine. Tai Long Deng smiled coldly. In the next moment, his body trembled and his aura surged again. This guy was smart. He didn't use his full strength when he attacked just now, holding back some of his strength. He was waiting for Nie Tian to fight him head-on. Everyone looked at the 2 figures in the sky. They didn't expect Nie Tian to fight Tai Long Deng head-on. Originally, with Nie Tian's speed, he would be invincible. There was no need for a head-on battle. Isn't Lord Nie Tian too arrogant to fight Tai Long Deng head-on? Tai Long Deng is using the Tai family's secret technique. It's said that this secret technique can greatly increase one's battle strength. Can Lord Nie Tian really contend with the Tai family's secret technique? Lord Nie Tian shouldn't be so arrogant. The crowd discussed, their eyes trembling. They all felt that Nie Tian fighting Tai Long Deng head-on was an unwise decision. However, Nie Tian was extremely indifferent. Sword insight surged around him. It was extremely restrained. He seemed like a beast that was in deep slumber and would erupt with its strongest killing intent at any moment. Nie Tian, it's your fortune to die to the Tai family's secret art. Tai Long Deng stared at Nie Tian with a cold expression, after which he took a step forwards, causing the space around him to tremble as a surge of his bloodline power gushed forth. Boom! A terrifyingly sharp claw appeared in the sky. It was as majestic as a mountain and as sharp as a blade. It carried an extreme killing intent as it slashed towards Nie Tian. Nietian stood tall in the sky, like a rock that stabilized the sea in a storm, majestic and unmoving. When the black claws were less than 100 meters away from him, he moved. Hua! Nietian raised his arm and swung his sword with tremendous force. His movements were simple and plain, yet they revealed an overbearing aura that caused one's heart to palpitate. Boom! Following which, boundless sword intent condensed in the sky, forming a terrifying sword shadow that resembled a gigantic dragon. Boom! 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 The sword shadow was majestic and terrifying. In an instant, it collided with the black claws, causing the sky to tremble and the black claws to shatter. No! Tai Long Deng's eyes trembled as he felt a terrifying force pressing down on him. His face paled as he screamed out in fear. He had never thought that Nietian's strength would be this terrifying. In his opinion, this was simply impossible. Is the figure standing before him really a second-rank half-saint martial artist? But it was already too late. The sword's shadow whizzed downwards, engulfing Tai Long Deng's figure in an instant. The crowd below was completely dumbfounded, unable to believe their eyes. Nietian was too terrifying. After a long time, the sword intent in the sky dissipated and a bloody figure appeared in front of the crowd. It was Tai Long Deng. Fortunately, he had used the Tai clan's secret technique and was still alive. Why are you so strong? Tai Long Deng's body trembled uncontrollably. There was shock and confusion in his eyes, but most of all, there was fear, a fear that came from the bottom of his heart. It's not that I'm too strong, it's that you're too weak. Nie Tianling sneered as his silhouette flickered, appearing beside Tai Long Deng. What do you want? Tai Long Deng's eyes trembled as he felt Nie Tian's murderous intent. Tai Long Deng, I gave you a chance to leave, but you didn't cherish it. You can't blame me for what happens next. Nie Tianling sneered as sword intent gushed out from his body, enveloping Tai Long Deng. He didn't directly kill Tai Long Deng because he still had a use for him. After all, Tai Long Deng was Tai Chingfeng's son. Since Tai Long Deng failed to invite Hai Dachuan and Nie Tian, Tai Chingfeng would probably make a move himself. Nie Tian held Tai Long Deng's life in his hands. If Tai Chingfeng came, he would definitely be afraid. Lord, let's return to the island first. Nie Tian escorted Tai Long Deng to Hai Dachuan's side and said with a faint smile, All right. Hai Dachuan glanced at Tai Long Deng and couldn't help but sigh. Although Tai Long Deng was defeated by Nie Tian and became a prisoner, the Ocean Dragon Island wouldn't be peaceful anymore. Tai Chingfeng, seeing that Tai Long Deng had yet to return, would definitely pay a visit personally. At that time, there would definitely be a huge battle. Hai Dachuan's gaze swept across Nie Tian. He knew that the fate of the Ocean Dragon Island depended on Nie Tian alone. Nie Tian, however, just as Nie Tian and Hai Dachuan were about to return to the Ocean Dragon Island, a voice rang out. Let go of my senior brother Tai. Nie Tian's gaze froze. He suddenly turned around and saw a familiar face. Mu Lei. At that moment, a middle-aged man who looked similar to Mu Lei stood beside Mu Lei. He was staring at Nie Tian with a gloomy face. Uncle Mu, save me. Tai Long Deng saw the middle-aged man, and his eyes couldn't help but tremble. His eyes lit up, and he shouted in surprise. The middle-aged man beside Mu Lei was none other than his father, the Lord of Thunderclap Island, Mu Tsubing, Lord of Thunderclap Island. Hai Dachuan's eyes trembled when he saw Mu Tsubing, and he cried out in surprise. He didn't expect Mu Tsubing to appear at this time. Lord of Ocean Dragon Island, how dare you let someone injure young master Tai Long Deng? Mu Tsubing's eyes darkened, and he bellowed. Hai Dachuan was stunned, and his expression was extremely ugly. I'm the one who injured Tai Long Deng. At that moment, Nie Tian took a step forward and looked at Mu Tsubing from afar. He said, I am also the one who injured your son. If you want revenge, come at me. Mu Tsubing's expression froze when he heard Nie Tian's words. A murderous intent flashed in his eyes, and he asked Nie Tian coldly, You are Nie Tian? I am Nie Tian. Nie Tian replied indifferently. He then took a step forward and walked straight towards Mu Tsubing. Father. Mu Lei's face turned pale when he saw Nie Tian walking towards him. He shouted and involuntarily took a step back. Chapter 2884. Chapter 2879. Chapter 2879. Bullying others. Farney Tian took a step forward and stopped 10,000 meters away from the Mu father and son duo. His eyes were cold, but he did not speak. Mu Tsubing, the lord of Thunderclap Island, looked at Nie Tian and felt an indescribable fear in his heart. However, he regained his composure in the next moment and thought to himself, why would I be afraid? It must be an illusion. This kid is only a second-stage half-saint, while I'm a seventh-stage half-saint. Why should I be afraid of him? Mu Tsubing actually sensed danger in front of Nie Tian, which puzzled him. He was the lord of an island and a seventh-stage half-saint. There was no reason for him to be afraid of a second-stage half-saint. You're the Thunderclap Island Lord? At this moment, Nie Tian raised his brows and asked, what brings you to Ocean Dragon Island? Mu Tsubing's eyes narrowed, and he calmed down. Nie Tian, I came to Ocean Dragon Island to bring a message to Lord Tai Chungfeng. I would like to invite you and Island Lord Hai Long to Nine Dragons Island. Mu Tsubing could restrain his aura when he spoke and did not reveal any arrogance. Umph. Upon hearing Mu Tsubing's words, Nie Tian chuckled. Then, he looked at Tai Long Ding, pointed at the latter, and said, Lord of Thunderclap Island, do you think you're stronger or weaker than Tai Long Ding? Mu Tsubing looked at Nie Tian, and his eyes narrowed. How could he not tell that Nie Tian's words were a blatant threat? However, he had indeed thought about Nie Tian's question. He was the Thunderclap Island Lord and was a seventh-stage half-saint. Tai Long Ding was the #1 genius of Nine Dragons 100 Islands and was a fifth-stage half-saint. If it was a life-and-death battle, he might not be a match for Tai Long Ding. After all, Tai Long Ding had the Tai family's secret technique. He was very confused about how Nie Tian, with his strength, had defeated Tai Long Ding and even beaten him up so miserably. Looks like the Thunder Island Lord feels that he's no match for Tai Long Ding. Seeing that Mu Tsubing was silent, Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, even Tai Long Ding couldn't invite me. Do you think you can? As he spoke, Nie Tian stared at Mu Tsubing with contempt. Actually, he always had a question in his heart. Why were the martial artists of the edge of the bitter sea so weak? Hai Dachuan and Mu Tsubing were the masters of an island, but they were only half-saints. With such strength, they could only be outer disciples in the Saint Soul Academy. Even the #1 genius of the Nine Dragons 100 Islands, Tai Long Ding, was only a 5th-rank half-saint. The shore of the bitter sea was in the Sacred Soul domain. It was really strange that the strength of the martial artists here was so low. How could Nie Tian know that the entire horizon of the Sea of Misery was enveloped by an energy called the Sea of Misery Restriction? The martial artists of the shores of the Bitter Sea were born with the Bitter Sea Restriction within their bodies. This was also the reason why their strength was not suppressed by the Bitter Sea Restriction. However, although the Sea of Misery Restriction allowed the martial artists of the shores of the Bitter Sea to be free from the suppression of the Bitter Sea Restriction, it suppressed their martial bodies and talents. Moreover, the stronger one was, the more obvious the suppression of the Sea of Misery Restriction would be. It was just like the people of the Dragon Rebel clan, who were born with the Shadow Restriction within their bodies and could not improve their strength. Most of the martial artists of the Eye of the Bitter Sea were below half-saints. Only the genius martial artists could reach half-saints. However, even the top geniuses only had the strength of a 9th-rank half-saint. Only the monstrous martial artists could break through to the demi-saint realm, and even then, they would only be low-level demi-saints. It was rumored that the strongest person in the history of the shore of the Bitter Sea was only a 5th-rank demi-saint. When Mu Tsubing heard what Nie Tian said, his old face became uglier than if he had eaten shit. Thunder Island Lord, you should leave. If Tai Chungfeng really wants to see me, let him come himself. Nie Tian smiled faintly and turned around, ready to leave. He was still thinking about the volcano on the Sea Dragon Island and did not have time to waste with Mu Tsubing. Tian, you came to the shore of the bitter sea from Manjusaka, didn't you? Mu Tsubing's eyes trembled as he suddenly asked. Tian's eyes narrowed, and he stopped moving. It was not strange that Mu Tsubing knew that he came from Manjusaka. Before this, Haidachuan had also guessed Tian's purpose for coming to the shore of the bitter sea. But the strange thing was, why would Mu Tsubing mention Manjusaka all of a sudden? Could it be that he knows news about Manjusaka? Tian, it seems that you really came from Manjusaka. Mu Tsubing laughed when he saw that Tian had stopped moving, and said, if I tell you that Lord Tai Ching-Fong knows where Manjusaka is, would you be willing to go to Nine Dragons Island? Is what you said true? Tian's eyes narrowed, and a Manjusaka appeared in his eyes as he asked coldly. Of course. Mu Tsubing nodded as a strange light flashed in his eyes. Tian's eyes were shining brightly as he stared at Mu Tsubing. He was thinking about how much of what Mu Tsubing said was true. All right, I'll go with you to Nine Dragons Island. After a while, Tian's eyes flickered as he said in a deep voice, my little friend Tian, big brother Tian. Haidachuan and the Sea Dragon King shouted at the same time as he finished speaking. It was obvious that they did not want him to go to Nine Dragons Island. Lord Island, Brother Dragon King, I know what I'm doing. Tian smiled faintly as his eyes revealed an overbearing confidence. Although he said so, he was not sure if this trip to Nine Dragons Island would be a blessing or a curse. Tian, bring young Master Tai Long Dang along. Let's go. Mu Tsubing smiled and was about to leave. Wait. Tian laughed and said, leave the hostage behind. Hostage? Mu Tsubing was stunned and did not react for a moment. Him. Tian smiled faintly as he pointed at Mu Lei. Tian, what do you mean by this? Mu Tsubing then realized that Tian wanted Mu Lei to stay as a hostage. He was furious. Obviously, Tian did not intend to bring Tai Long Ding to Nine Dragons Island. Am I not clear? With these words, Mu Lei and Tai Long Ding will be the hostages. With a faint smile, Tian moved and walked directly towards Tai Long Ding. Father, save me. Mu Lei was so scared that his face turned green as he shouted. He did not want to stay as a hostage. Tian, don't go too far. Mu Tsubing stepped forward and stood in front of Mu Lei. He said Tian coldly. It was fine that Tian did not release Tai Long Ding, but he even wanted to keep Mu Lei. This was too much. I'm sorry, I just like to go too far. Tian smiled faintly and said, and I especially like to bully people like you. As he spoke, sword will surged all over his body. His sword aura soared into the sky, sharp and murderous. Mu Tsubing felt Tian's aura and his heart sank. Unconcealable fear appeared in his eyes. He glanced at Tai Long Ding and finally nodded. He did not dare to fight Tian. Very well. With a faint smile, Tian's figure flickered and he reached out with his hand, grabbing the wood thunder. He released several sword wills around him and sealed Mu Lei's vital meridians. Sword Chi sealing meridians.